You've been taught to believe worry is normal, that it means you care, that it keeps you safe, that without it you'd lose control. But if that were true, why does worry feel like chains around your mind? Why do your thoughts spin all night, replaying the same fears over and over, leaving you exhausted but no closer to peace? Why do you wake up tired, heavy, carrying battles that haven't even happened? The truth is, worry isn't protection. It's poison. It steals the present, it blinds you to joy, and it tricks you into fighting ghosts that only exist in your head. But here's the secret. Letting go of worry doesn't mean giving up, it means finally living free. For thousands of years, Buddhist teachings have held the key. Masters who faced suffering, loss, and uncertainty discovered a way of life so simple, yet so powerful, it dissolves anxiety at its root. Not through running, not through control, but through deep wisdom that transforms how you see the world. Tonight, as you hear these words, something inside you will shift. The noise in your mind will soften. The tightness in your chest will begin to ease. You'll feel a space open up, a lightness you forgot was possible. And tomorrow, when worry comes knocking again, you'll know you don't have to answer. This isn't just an idea, it's a path, a way to make life effortless, calm, unshakable. Are you ready to walk it? Let's begin. You've carried worry like a shadow, haven't you? It clings to you when the world is quiet. It sits on your chest when you try to sleep. It follows you into every decision, whispering that something will go wrong. You've been told to fight it, to ignore it, to distract yourself, but nothing works for long. That's because worry isn't just random noise in the mind. It's concentration, it's focus, it's energy misdirected, and the very thing that has kept you trapped can be turned into the key that sets you free. When the Buddha spoke of wrong concentration, he wasn't talking about laziness or lack of focus. He was pointing to the way we use our mind as a spotlight. Whatever we place under it becomes the entire stage. Worry is that spotlight fixed on shadows. It's meditation gone astray. You've been meditating on suffering without even knowing it. Every time you replay a mistake, every time you build stories about the future, every time you spiral into what if, you are practicing concentration just on the wrong object. You've trained your mind to bow before fear. Think of the countless hours lost to this practice. The moments when you weren't in danger, but your body felt the tremble of fear anyway. The situations that never came true, but drained your strength as if they had. Worry is nothing more than misplaced devotion. You've been worshipping a false god of disaster, feeding it your attention day after day, and what you worship shapes your world. Now, here's the truth that changes everything. The same force that keeps you bound can liberate you. The mind is not broken, it is simply misused. The spotlight that has been fixed on pain can just as easily shine on peace. The concentration that fuels endless worry can become the concentration that dissolves worry completely. This is the shift from wrong concentration to right concentration, from mika samadhi to sama samadhi. It isn't about stopping the mind, it's about turning it toward what frees you instead of what enslaves you. The Buddha taught that right concentration is a mind unified, collected, steady. It is not restless, it is not scattered, it does not leap into past or future. It rests, it absorbs, it abides in clarity. Worry, on the other hand, is scattered energy that masquerades as control. You think you are preparing, but you are only fracturing yourself. Your mind jumps from one fear to another, from one imagined scenario to the next, building a house of anxiety brick by brick. Right concentration tears down that house by simply refusing to keep building it. Think of how much energy you've wasted in your life through worry. The hours staring at the ceiling, The days half present because your mind was elsewhere, the conversations you missed because you were rehearsing catastrophes. That energy isn't gone, it's simply misdirected. And once you begin to redirect it, you discover a shocking truth. Life doesn't require effort to be lived, it requires release. When you let go of feeding wrong concentration, you step into a flow that carries you instead of drains you. Right concentration begins with awareness. You start by catching the moment the spotlight turns toward fear. That flash of what if, that tightening in your chest. Most people don't notice it until they're already consumed, until the movie of disaster has already started playing on the screen of their mind. But if you train yourself to notice earlier, you interrupt the loop before it swallows you whole. This is why meditation is not just sitting quietly, but sharpening the mind's ability to notice. Each time you observe a breath, each time you return from distraction, you're training the very muscle that can stop worry before it blooms. And once you notice, you redirect. Not by force, not by shouting at your mind, but by calmly choosing a new object. The breath, the body, a mantra, a wholesome thought. This is the genius of Buddhist practice. You don't battle thoughts, you replace their fuel source. A fire without wood dies out. Worry without attention vanishes. You don't conquer worry by pushing it down, you starve it by refusing to feed it. Now, here's where the beauty deepens. Right concentration is not just the absence of wrong concentration. It is the gateway to joy, tranquility, and insight. When your mind rests steadily on what is wholesome, the heart opens. Anxiety gives way to stillness. Fear dissolves into spaciousness. And from that stillness, wisdom arises. You begin to see reality not as your fears paint it, but as it truly is. Impermanent, interconnected, not controlled by a single self. Worry cannot survive in the light of this clarity. Let's go even deeper. Why does worry feel so sticky? Because it mimics the form of meditation. Think about it. In both, the mind returns again and again to the same object. In meditation, you return to the breath. In worry, you return to the fear. In meditation, the body reacts with calm. In worry, the body reacts with stress. But the process, the repetition, the focus, the immersion is the same. You've been practicing meditation your entire life, but on the wrong subjects. This is why the Buddha's path feels both familiar and foreign. Familiar because you already know how to concentrate. Foreign because you must redirect that skill toward liberation instead of bondage. The shift is subtle but revolutionary. For example, when fear of failure arises, the worried mind spins. What if I embarrass myself? What if I lose everything? The concentrated mind notices, fear has appeared. And instead of feeding it, it returns to the present breath, the steady ground beneath the feet. The worry fades because it is not given energy. Slowly, this practice reprograms the mind. Wrong concentration weakens, right concentration strengthens. Anxiety loosens its grip, not because you fought it, but because you stopped bowing to it. The Buddha often spoke of jhana, deep meditative absorption, as the fruit of right concentration. In these states, the mind rests so fully that joy, ease, and clarity flood in naturally. Think of the contrast, the burning restlessness of worry versus the cooling bliss of absorption. One consumes you, the other nourishes you, and yet both are powered by the same root ability, focus. Your liberation doesn't require building a new mind. It requires tuning the mind you already have. This understanding also reveals why distraction never truly ends worry. When you drown yourself in entertainment, food, work, or constant stimulation, You are not dissolving wrong concentration, you are masking it. The spotlight is still searching, restless in the background. Only when you train the mind to redirect consciously do you discover a freedom that lasts beyond distraction. This is not escape, this is transformation. Think of the relief this brings. No longer do you have to see yourself as broken, as a victim of uncontrollable thoughts. You begin to see the mechanics. Worry is not you, it is simply concentration misplaced. And what can be misplaced can be corrected. This reframing alone removes so much shame. You're not weak for worrying. You're powerful, so powerful that even your fears are fueled by your focused energy, and that same power can now be turned toward awakening. In this way, every worried moment becomes an opportunity. Instead of resenting your anxiety, you begin to use it as a teacher. Each time worry arises, it reveals where your mind has strayed. Each time you catch it, you strengthen awareness. Each time you redirect, you train right concentration. Slowly, the tide shifts. The anxious loops that once ruled your life become the very practice ground for liberation. Your suffering becomes your path, and the results ripple into every part of life. Relationships soften because you're no longer lost in imagined conflicts. Work becomes lighter because you're no longer burdened by endless scenarios. Sleep deepens because your mind no longer plays the same tapes at night. You discover that the effortless life is not a life without challenges, but a life where the mind does not add extra chains to those challenges. You face what is real, not what is invented. You move with clarity instead of fear. This is the gift of right concentration. It doesn't promise you control over the future. It doesn't guarantee safety from pain, but it gives you something greater. Freedom in the midst of uncertainty. Peace even in the presence of storms. And when you taste even a drop of that peace, you understand why the Buddha called it the heart of the path. Worry is not your destiny. It is simply a wrong turn. And the way back is already within you. You've seen how worry is not weakness but misplaced concentration, how the same focus that feeds fear can be turned toward peace. Yet there is something deeper beneath this restless mind. Even when you know how to redirect attention, there's still a force pulling, a current beneath the surface. This is the craving to become. The Buddha called it bhava tanha, the thirst for being. It hides inside anxiety, and until you see it clearly, you remain bound to the wheel of worry. Fear is rarely about what is happening right now. It usually hides in the thought of who you might be or who you might fail to become. The student worries about being successful, the parent about being seen as good enough, the worker about being respected, the partner about being loved. Behind every anxious thought is a subtle voice whispering, "I must become someone." And that whisper is endless. It never stops at one achievement, one title, one layer of safety. The moment you get what you want, it shifts, it asks for more. It tells you that you are still incomplete. This is the hidden root of anxiety. You don't just fear losing money, you fear losing the identity of a capable provider. You don't just fear making a mistake, you fear losing the image of being competent. You don't just fear rejection, you fear losing the story of being lovable. Worry exposes this subtle grasping, like a flashlight shining on the chains that keep you tied. The Buddha's teaching cuts through this with piercing clarity. Craving to become is still craving. Even if it looks noble, even if it sounds respectable, it binds you to suffering. When you crave to become safe, respected, or successful, you are still tightening the knot of samsara. The anxiety you feel is the tug of that knot against your heart. What happens when you let go of this craving? A space opens that feels foreign at first. Without striving to become, who are you? Without chasing after identities, what remains? Many people resist this teaching because it feels like death to the ego. The self wants to be something. It wants recognition, security, validation. But Buddhism reveals that this hunger is bottomless. It cannot be satisfied because the very sense of self it tries to feed is unstable. It flickers like a flame in the wind, and the more you try to hold it, the more anxious you become. Look closely, and you will see how this craving operates in daily life. When you wake up and feel the need to check your phone for messages, underneath it is the craving to feel important. When you hesitate before speaking in a meeting, underneath is the craving to be respected. When you scroll through endless images online, underneath is the craving to feel that your life measures up. Worry is the surface symptom. Becoming is the hidden disease. But here's the liberating truth. You don't need to become anything to be whole. The Dharma points to a peace that is not earned, not granted by others, not dependent on performance. This is why monks shave their heads, wear simple robes, and let go of possessions. It is not rejection of life, but rejection of the endless trap of becoming. In that simplicity, they discover a freedom deeper than any worldly success. You may not live as a monk, but you can taste this freedom in small ways. Every time you let go of needing to prove yourself, you weaken the chain of bhava tanha. Every time you allow yourself to rest without achievement, you cut into the root of anxiety. Every time you accept that safety cannot be absolute, that respect cannot be forced, that success is impermanent, you loosen the grip of becoming. Think about how much fear has shaped your choices. The job taken out of fear of being left behind. The silence kept out of fear of being judged. The relationships clung to out of fear of being alone. Each one is the shadow of becoming. And yet when you look back, how many of those fears actually came true? How many of those moments of worry were nothing but ghosts of craving playing in your mind? The Buddha described life as a fire fueled by craving. When you crave to become, you are throwing wood into that fire. Anxiety is the smoke that suffocates you. Letting go is like refusing to add more fuel. Slowly, the flames die down, and the smoke clears. What remains is not emptiness in the negative sense, but spaciousness, a freedom from having to constantly perform, prove, and chase. This is not to say you stop acting in the world. Action continues. You work, you care, you create. But the difference is profound. Action without craving is light. It flows naturally, without the heavy burden of anxiety. You are not working to become respected, you are simply working. You are not loving to become worthy, you are simply loving. You are not striving to become safe, you are simply living. The weight of identity drops, and life becomes effortless. This effortless quality comes from recognizing the illusion of control in becoming. Anxiety thrives on the belief that if you just become something more skilled, more admired, more secure, then the future will finally be safe. But the future never bends perfectly to your control. Illness comes, relationships shift, economies collapse. No identity, no achievement, no image can protect you forever. Seeing this clearly is not despair, it is liberation. Because once you stop grasping for impossible guarantees, you begin to rest in the only ground that never moves, the present. The craving to become also keeps you trapped in comparison. Worry often rises when you measure yourself against others. You think, I must catch up, I must stand out, I must not fall behind. But who set this race? Who made these rules? The Dharma reveals that this is just another trick of becoming. You can spend your whole life running in circles and still end up dissatisfied. But when you step out of the race, you discover the peace of simply being. Look closely at the language of your own mind when worry arises. You'll often hear the words, what if? What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if I lose everything? These questions are never about now. They are about a self projected into the future, a self that must become or must avoid becoming. But the self in those fears doesn't exist. It is a phantom built by craving. The more you chase it, the more anxious you feel. When you stop chasing, the phantom dissolves, and with it, the worry. The practice here is to expose this mechanism every time anxiety arises. When you feel the grip of fear, pause and ask, what am I trying to become? Am I trying to become safe? To become admired? To become successful? By naming it, you weaken its hold. You begin to see that the worry is not about reality, but about a craving projected onto reality. And once you see the craving, you have a choice. Continue feeding it, or let it fall away. Over time, this choice transforms everything. The storms of anxiety still appear, but they lose their power. You no longer take them as signs of weakness or danger. You take them as signals pointing to where craving hides. Instead of being swallowed by fear, you use fear as a teacher. Each worry becomes a doorway to freedom, each moment of grasping an invitation to let go. This is how letting go of worry is not just a psychological trick, but a spiritual revolution. It cuts into the very fuel of samsara. Samsara is the endless cycle of becoming and unbecoming, birth and death, rise and fall. Every act of craving to become spins the wheel again. Every act of letting go slows it down. Worry is not just a personal problem. It is a glimpse into the machinery of existence itself. And when you begin to free yourself from it, you are not only healing your own mind, you are stepping closer to liberation. The Buddha did not promise that life would be free of pain, but he showed that freedom is possible even in the midst of pain. When you stop tying your identity to every outcome, when you stop clinging to every story of who you must be, you taste a freedom deeper than pleasure, deeper than success, deeper than safety. It is the freedom of not having to become anything at all. This is why anxiety is such a powerful teacher. It exposes the hidden craving beneath ordinary life. It shows you the cost of becoming. And if you are willing to look deeply, it guides you to the very place where samsara can be undone. Worry shows you where you are still grasping. Letting go shows you who you truly are without that grasping. And in that space, life flows effortlessly, no longer chained to fear, no longer bound to becoming, but free. You've seen how craving to become feeds the fire of anxiety, how the restless pull to secure an identity keeps you trapped in fear. But even when you loosen that grip, there's still another illusion that fuels worry, the belief that everything depends on you. The sense that outcomes rise and fall on your shoulders alone is one of the heaviest burdens the mind carries. It is this false control that makes the heart race, the body tense, and the nights sleepless. Buddhism offers a key to this prison through the profound truth of dependent origination, paticca samuppada. Worry thrives on the thought that life is a single-thread story with you at the center. When you believe that everything rests on your decisions, your performance, your strength, anxiety becomes inevitable. A choice feels like a cliff, a mistake feels like ruin, success feels like survival. This narrow view blinds you to the web of conditions that truly shape existence. You are not the sole author of every outcome. You are one condition among countless others, and outcomes arise not from me, but from the meeting of endless causes. The Buddha taught that nothing arises in isolation. A sprout does not appear because of a seed alone. It requires soil, water, sunlight, air. A flame does not burn because of a spark alone. It needs fuel, oxygen, the absence of wind. In the same way, every moment of your life is born from countless conditions, stretching back beyond memory. The job you hold exists because of your education, the people who taught you, the food that sustained you, the parents who raised you, the society that built schools, the weather that allowed harvests, and so on without end. To say, "I alone made this happen," is as false as saying a single drop makes the ocean. This truth dissolves the weight of false control. Anxiety whispers, "If I fail, everything collapses." Dependent origination replies, "No single factor controls everything. The universe is a web, not a line." When you see this, pressure begins to lift. Responsibility does not disappear. You still act, you still choose, but the crushing delusion of total control fades. You become like a musician in an orchestra. Your part matters, but the symphony is larger than you. This understanding changes how you respond to worry. Instead of obsessing over one decision as if it will define your entire future, you see it as one cause among many. Instead of believing your worth is tied to one outcome, you see the broader flow of conditions. Anxiety loses its grip because its favorite story, the story that everything depends on you, no longer holds power. Think of how this applies to fear of failure. When you fear a project collapsing, you believe that your effort alone determines success. But dependent origination reveals that success depends on markets, timing, support, resources, the moods of others, even the weather on a given day. You cannot control all of these. Worry is wasted energy because it tries to manage what is beyond grasp. Right effort is to do your part with clarity, then release the rest into the vast web of conditions. This also heals relationships. Much of interpersonal anxiety comes from trying to control how others see you, love you, or treat you, but their reactions are not born from your actions alone. They arise from their past, their habits, their current mood, their conditioning. To believe you can control another's heart completely is to set yourself up for endless worry. When you see dependent origination, you care. You speak truth, you act kindly, but you do not collapse when the outcome is not what you hope. You see that their response arises from many threads, not just yours. The Buddha explained this chain most clearly in the 12 links of dependent origination: ignorance conditions, formations condition consciousness, and so on, leading to birth, aging, and death. Anxiety is deeply tied to ignorance of this chain. When you don't see the complexity of conditions, you cling to the illusion of me as sole controller. That ignorance gives rise to formations of fear, which condition restless thoughts, which lead to worry and suffering. But when wisdom breaks ignorance, the chain loosens. You begin to trust the flow instead of fearing it. This trust is not passive. It does not mean you abandon effort or resign yourself to fate. It means you act without the arrogance of false control. You plant seeds, knowing soil and rain will play their role. You speak honestly, knowing another's ears and heart must be ready. You strive, but without the poison of perfectionism. This balance between effort and surrender is the middle way that turns life from a battlefield into a flow. Notice how this insight softens even physical tension. Much of bodily stress comes from trying to hold the world in your hands. Shoulders tighten, jaws clench, stomach knots, as if by gripping hard enough you can bend outcomes to your will. When you see dependent origination, that grip begins to relax. You realize you are a wave in the ocean, not the ocean itself. The body loosens, the breath deepens, because the mind no longer carries an impossible burden. This understanding also dissolves guilt. Many people live in regret, believing past mistakes alone caused their present suffering. But dependent origination reveals that even the worst choices did not act alone. They were shaped by countless prior causes: upbringing, ignorance, emotions, circumstances. This does not excuse harm, but it reframes it. You were not an isolated villain. You were a link in a chain. And just as past causes created the present, present choices create new conditions. This frees you from the paralyzing weight of guilt and allows compassionate responsibility without despair. It also changes how you view success. When things go well, the ego rushes to claim, "I did this. It was all me." That claim feeds pride, which later flips into fear of losing status. But when you see dependent origination, you realize your success rests on countless unseen supports. Gratitude replaces pride, and gratitude carries no fear. You can celebrate without the anxious need to cling. Meditation on conditions reveals this truth directly. When you watch a thought arise, you see it is not born from nowhere. A sound triggers a memory, which sparks an emotion, which shapes a thought. Each link is dependent on others. The thought is not yours in isolation. It is a ripple in the vast stream of causes. When you see this in real time, the belief in me as sole controller collapses, and worry collapses with it. This wisdom even transforms how you face death. Fear of dying is often the belief that my end is in my hands. But dependent origination shows that life itself is a web of conditions, and death is the natural shift of those conditions. The body dissolves because conditions change. Consciousness moves on because conditions shift. You cannot freeze the flow. Seeing this does not create despair but peace. You stop clinging to control of the uncontrollable, and you rest in trust of the Dharma's unfolding. Daily life becomes lighter with this insight. Missed opportunities hurt less because you see they were conditioned, not purely your failure. Uncertainty feels less threatening because you know countless causes are at play, not just your effort. Even setbacks transform into teachers because they reveal conditions you had not seen before. Life stops being a personal trial to be won and becomes a field of causes to be understood. The practice is simple but profound. In moments of worry, pause and ask, what conditions are at work here? Instead of obsessing over me and my control, open your view to the wider web. See the people, the environment, the timing, the unseen forces. This shift pulls you out of the prison of self-centered anxiety into the spaciousness of reality. Over time, this becomes second nature. You no longer fall into the trap of thinking, everything rests on me. You act, but with humility. You care, but without clinging. You strive, but without fear. And slowly, life begins to feel effortless. Not because you have mastered control, but because you have surrendered the illusion of control. The Buddha's wisdom of dependent origination is not an abstract philosophy. It is a medicine for worry, a balm for anxiety, a doorway to peace. Each time you release the belief that outcomes depend solely on you, you taste that peace. Each time you see the vast web of conditions, you step closer to freedom. And when this insight fully sinks into your heart, worry no longer finds a place to root. You live as part of the flow, trusting the Dharma, unburdened, free. When the grip of false control loosens, life begins to feel lighter, but the mind still hums restlessly. Even when you understand that outcomes don't depend on you alone, thoughts keep circling, pulling you back into agitation. This ceaseless commentary, this endless self-talk, is the hidden current of worry. It drains you not because of what is happening outside, but because of the noise that never ends inside. The Buddha pointed to a practice deeper than silence of the tongue. He spoke of noble silence, Arya Tunhi Bhava, the inner quiet where worry has no ground to grow. Silence here does not mean muting your voice or holding back in conversations. Many remain outwardly quiet while their minds scream with anxious chatter. True noble silence is the stilling of this internal noise, the dropping of commentary, the release of the endless narrator that insists on controlling every moment. It is the difference between standing in a peaceful room while your thoughts thunder in your head and standing in the same room with the mind finally at rest. Only one is real silence. Worry thrives on noise. The anxious mind talks constantly, even if no words pass the lips. It replays arguments, plans, responses, rehearses failures, creates dialogues with people who are not even present. This chatter convinces you it is necessary, that without it you would be unprepared. But in truth it only drowns the clarity that arises when the mind is still. Noble silence is not emptiness. It is the presence of clarity that can only be heard when the noise falls away. Think of how often you argue with yourself inside. You replay a conversation, telling yourself what you should have said. You leap ahead, creating imaginary scenarios of what might happen tomorrow. You label every sight and sound: good, bad, threat, reward. This constant labeling and rehearsing fills your inner world with static. Anxiety feeds on this static. It is not the event that exhausts you, but the commentary about the event. Noble silence cuts through this commentary and leaves only the direct experience. The Buddha often remained silent when pressed with abstract or speculative questions. This was not ignorance or avoidance, but wisdom. He knew that much mental suffering is born from needless words, concepts, spinning endlessly, without bringing freedom. In noble silence, the mind does not fuel these endless speculations. It rests. In that rest, a different kind of knowing arises, not intellectual, but direct, immediate, unclouded. Worry feels urgent, but it is built from thoughts chasing each other. When those thoughts are not entertained, when the commentary stops, urgency fades. The body may still face challenges, but the heart does not panic. Silence creates space for response instead of reaction. It is in this stillness that wisdom has room to speak. As long as noise dominates, wisdom is drowned out. This silence is not forced suppression. Pushing thoughts away only creates tension. Noble silence is the art of letting thoughts pass without answering them, like refusing to join a quarrel. You watch the words rise and fall, but you do not participate. Over time, they fade because they are not fed. In that quiet, you begin to hear what has always been there beneath the chatter: peace. Notice how much of your worry is actually commentary about time. What if later? Why did that happen before? These are words about past and future. Silence interrupts this timeline. In silence, there is only now. The breath enters and leaves, sensations come and go, the present unfolds without narration. Anxiety loses its ground because it cannot survive in pure presence. It needs commentary to exist, and silence denies it that fuel. This practice also reveals the depth of listening. When the mind is silent, you hear others more clearly, not just their words, but their tone, their pauses, their unspoken feelings. Much relationship anxiety comes from mishearing or projecting. Silence cleans the lens. It allows genuine listening without the distortion of your own noise. Clarity replaces misunderstanding. Compassion replaces worry. Even your relationship with yourself changes. Without the chatter, you no longer relate to yourself as a running commentary of judgments and expectations. You rest with yourself as you are, without labels. This is where acceptance grows. You stop needing to tell a story about who you are, and in that stillness, the restless craving to become softens. Noble silence is not withdrawal from life, it is deeper presence with life as it is, uncolored by anxious words. Worry often disguises itself as planning, but planning without silence becomes obsession. Noble silence does not forbid practical thought, but it sets boundaries. You learn to think when thinking is useful, and to stop when it is not. Silence holds thought like a tool rather than letting it run the workshop endlessly. The mind rests in quiet until needed, then acts with precision, then rests again. This rhythm ends exhaustion. Meditation is the training ground for this silence. When you sit and watch the breath, thoughts arise. At first they are loud, insistent, demanding attention, but as you refrain from answering them, they weaken. Slowly, gaps appear. Moments of genuine quiet arrive. At first they may last only seconds, but those seconds reveal more peace than hours of noise. With practice, silence lengthens. It becomes not just a meditation state, but a way of living. Daily life offers constant practice. Waiting in line, sitting in traffic, walking to the next task, these moments are usually filled with inner chatter. But they can become places of noble silence. Instead of filling the space with rehearsed worries, you rest in awareness of the moment. The line moves, the car idles, the feet step, and you are there without commentary. These ordinary silences accumulate, reshaping the mind's habit. Noble silence is not only an antidote to worry, but a doorway to insight. In the quiet, you begin to notice patterns that noise always covered. You see how thoughts rise and fade on their own. You see that you are not the voice, but the space in which the voice arises. This shift of identity from being the chatter to being the awareness of chatter breaks the identification that fuels anxiety. Worry no longer feels like me, but like passing weather. The Buddha called silence noble because it is not mere absence. It is a presence of dignity, wisdom, and peace. When you embody it, you carry a stillness that others feel. Your calm influences those around you. Conversations become clearer. Conflicts soften. The energy of rooms shifts. Silence is contagious in the best way. It spreads peace not by preaching, but by presence. Over time, you see how much unnecessary speech, both outward and inward, creates suffering. Every harsh word spoken in anger was first rehearsed inside. Every anxious scenario repeated out loud was first repeated silently. By cutting it at the root, noble silence prevents harm before it begins. This is why silence is not withdrawal, but compassion. It protects both yourself and others from needless suffering. You may fear silence at first, mistaking it for emptiness or boredom. But when you step into it, you discover it is rich. Every breath has texture, every sensation has depth, every moment carries fullness. Noise had hidden this richness. Worry had kept you trapped in thin words. Silence opens you to the vastness of direct experience. This practice is lifelong. The mind has been noisy for decades, and habits do not vanish overnight. But every moment of silence weakens worry's grip. Each time you refuse to join the chatter, you strengthen peace. Slowly, silence becomes your default. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of freedom. A silence in which clarity shines, in which the heart rests, in which life is lived without the chains of anxious noise. Noble silence is the ground on which all other practices flourish. Without it, wisdom is drowned in chatter. With it, wisdom blossoms naturally. It is here that the restless mind finally lays down its weapons, where worry has no place to hide, where the simple truth of peace reveals itself. When the noise ends, clarity begins, and in that clarity, life becomes effortless. When the inner chatter grows quiet and noble silence reveals its depth, a new awareness begins to surface. In that stillness, you may notice that worry does not always vanish immediately. Thoughts still rise, feelings still stir, memories still return. But now they appear differently, as if they are old echoes breaking the surface, demanding to be seen before they dissolve. Many teachers describe this as karmic dust, the subtle residue of past actions rising to be burned away. Instead of fighting these traces, the practice is to allow them to pass through, to let worry fulfill its course of purification. Karma is not punishment. It is the natural unfolding of causes and effects. Just as a seed grows into a tree when conditions are right, past thoughts, words, and deeds leave impressions in the mind and heart. These impressions do not disappear simply because you wish them away. They wait, and when the right condition appears, they rise. Worry is often the form they take. That restless tightening in the chest, that sudden storm of anxious thought, is not proof of weakness, it is residue surfacing. And if you meet it with resistance, you add more dust. If you meet it with openness, it burns clean. Think of the way fire consumes dry leaves. When the leaves catch flame, they crackle and smoke before turning to ash. In the same way, old karmic imprints stir and agitate the mind as they rise. But if you remain present, if you witness without clinging or pushing away, they dissolve. What is left behind is lighter, clearer, freer. Worry is not just a nuisance, it is often a chance for purification. This reframing changes the entire relationship with anxiety. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to see it as, "This is happening through me." Each episode of worry is not an enemy but an old debt being paid. With every anxious thought allowed to arise and pass, a layer of karmic dust falls away. Slowly, the mind becomes clearer, like a window no longer fogged by residue. Resistance, however, is what turns worry into suffering. When karmic dust rises and you react with anger, fear, or self-judgment, you scatter more dust into the air. You prolong the cycle. The key is to step back and let the dust settle on its own. This is why meditation is such a powerful tool. It trains you to watch without reacting, to let the fire of awareness consume without interference. Teachers often say the heart becomes lighter when karma is released. You may have felt this in moments after deep anxiety, when suddenly the storm passes and a strange clarity follows. It feels as if something heavy has lifted, though nothing outside has changed. This is the fruit of karmic dust dissolving. Each time you allow it to burn, you step closer to freedom. This understanding also brings compassion. When you see others drowning in worry, you realize they are not simply weak or irrational. They too are burning through karmic residue. Instead of judgment, you feel empathy. You know the process is painful, but you also know it can be purifying. This perspective softens your heart toward others, turning frustration into patience, irritation into care. There is also a practical wisdom here. When worry arises, instead of fueling it with endless stories, you can rest in the knowledge that it is passing energy, not truth. You do not need to believe every anxious thought. You do not need to identify with every restless feeling. You can hold them lightly as temporary clouds in the sky of mind. They are not permanent stains, only passing dust. This does not mean ignoring responsibility. Karma unfolds not just in thoughts, but in actions. Meeting worry with awareness does not absolve you from acting wisely in the world, but it does free you from the extra burden of believing the worry itself is who you are. It is simply the echo of old seeds maturing. You act responsibly where action is needed, and where none is required, you allow the residue to burn out in silence. Over time, this practice transforms fear into trust. At first, worry feels like attack, something to defend against. But when you see it as karmic dust, it feels like release. What once seemed like an enemy becomes an ally. What once felt like suffocation becomes cleansing. You learn to trust the process, even in discomfort. The heat of worry is no longer a curse, it is a fire refining you. This insight reaches even deeper when applied to long-term patterns. Many people feel haunted by the same recurring anxieties: fear of abandonment, fear of failure, fear of unworthiness. These themes often trace back to old experiences, sometimes even beyond this life. Each time they arise, they are not new, they are old dust being stirred. Seeing them this way prevents despair. You stop believing you are cursed or broken. You realize you are clearing layers that were always there. With patience, persistence, and compassion, even the heaviest residues dissolve. It is also important to recognize that karmic dust rises when conditions allow. Times of stress, change, or silence often stir it up. This is why meditation retreats can sometimes feel more turbulent than peaceful. When the mind becomes quiet, what was buried surfaces. But this is not failure, it is purification at work. Just as spring rains wash debris from the earth, stillness washes dust from the mind. The discomfort is a sign of cleaning, not of collapse. In daily life, this means treating worry not as a signal of danger, but as a signal of release. When worry appears, you can ask, "What is being cleared right now?" Instead of panicking, you open curiosity. You let the process unfold, knowing that every storm passes and leaves clearer skies. This shift alone removes much of the suffering layered on top of anxiety. This perspective also prevents the trap of self-blame. Many spiritual seekers fall into despair when they experience worry, believing they are failing in their practice. But karmic dust rising is not failure, it is progress. It means the conditions are right for residue to dissolve. The very presence of anxiety can be a sign that purification is happening. Meeting it with acceptance instead of judgment turns the cycle from bondage to freedom. The Buddha often emphasized patience and endurance in the path. Purification is not instant. The dust of lifetimes does not vanish overnight. But each moment of awareness, each time you let worry rise and fall without grasping, is a step closer to the clear heart. With time, the residue grows thinner, the storms grow shorter, the peace grows deeper. Living with this understanding brings a subtle joy even in hardship. You know that nothing is wasted. Every worry, every restless thought, every anxious surge is not meaningless suffering, but fuel for purification. What once felt like punishment now feels like opportunity. This joy does not deny pain, but it transforms the meaning of pain. It becomes part of the path, part of the unfolding of freedom. And as you walk this path, you discover a strength you did not know you had. The ability to sit with discomfort, to allow fire to burn without fleeing, is itself liberation. You no longer live in fear of worry. You meet it with dignity, knowing it cannot destroy you, only refine you. That courage becomes unshakable, and worry loses its sting. The final fruit of this practice is a heart both light and open. Freed from layers of karmic dust, you move through the world with clarity. Worry may still appear at times, but it no longer defines you. It rises, burns, and passes. The heart remains spacious, unburdened, free to love, free to act, free to rest. This is the promise of meeting worry, not with resistance, but with awareness, purification, clarity, and effortless peace. When worry is seen as karmic dust, the heart begins to open toward patience and purification. You no longer meet it with resistance, but with understanding that what rises is only old residue dissolving. Yet something even deeper hides beneath this process. Worry does not only come from past seeds, it is actively created in the present by the way the mind uses its own power. The same energy that builds temples, composes music, or envisions freedom, is also the energy that creates endless scenes of fear. This is the power of imagination, and when turned in the wrong direction, it becomes the root of anxiety. The Buddha never rejected the creative mind. He recognized its potential as both a path of liberation and a trap of bondage. Visualization of compassion, reflection on the qualities of the Buddha, meditation on the boundless nature of loving kindness, all of these rely on the mind's capacity to form images and possibilities beyond the present moment. But that same ability, left untrained, begins to serve fear instead of wisdom. The anxious mind constructs entire worlds of threat, failure, loss, and rejection. It convinces the body that what is unreal is happening now. The heart races, the breath shortens, the muscles tighten, all in response to events that exist only as projections. Anxiety is not the presence of danger, but the misuse of imagination. Think of how the mind invents stories. A delayed message becomes proof of rejection. A glance from a stranger becomes evidence of judgment. A single mistake grows into a future of ruin. None of these exist outside the mind, yet the body suffers as if they were facts. This is the trap of imagination enslaved to fear. What could be a tool for compassion and creativity becomes a chain around the heart. The worst part is how convincing these creations feel. The mind does not simply picture them, it believes them. Anxiety thrives because imagination does not stay neutral. It colors the world until you forget you are looking through a lens. A mind chained to fear does not say, "This is one possibility." It says, "This is reality." And in that moment, peace vanishes. Buddhism teaches that freedom comes not from destroying imagination, but from reclaiming it. You cannot stop the mind from creating, but you can direct what it creates. Instead of building prisons of fear, you can train it to open toward clarity, compassion, and trust. Just as a farmer directs water through channels, you direct imagination toward wholesome visions that uplift rather than suffocate. This shift begins with awareness. When anxiety arises, the first step is to recognize, this is a story. It may feel real, but it is not happening now. By naming it as projection, you separate from its grip. The body still reacts, but the heart begins to see through the illusion. With practice, this recognition grows faster, until you catch the story at its birth, rather than after it has consumed you. The next step is redirection. Instead of feeding the fearful scene, you offer the mind a different image. This is where Buddhist visualization becomes medicine. You may picture the breath as a gentle light filling the body, calming every cell. You may recall the image of the Buddha seated in stillness, radiating compassion. You may expand your awareness outward, envisioning kindness touching all beings. These practices are not fantasy, they are deliberate use of imagination to cultivate states that heal instead of harm. Anxiety often narrows the field of view. The story shrinks everything down to a single threat, a single fear. Visualization expands it again. By directing imagination to vastness, boundless compassion, infinite space, timeless wisdom, you loosen the grip of narrow fear. The mind cannot hold both the prison of anxiety and the openness of compassion at once. When you choose compassion, the prison walls dissolve. This also reveals why anxiety feels so exhausting. The mind is constantly rehearsing battles that never take place. It builds entire worlds, complete with dialogue, outcomes, consequences, all from thin air. The energy spent on these false realities leaves little for living the real moment. By reclaiming imagination, you return energy to the present. Life feels lighter, not because challenges disappear, but because you are no longer fighting shadows. It is also important to see that anxiety is not only about fear of disaster. Sometimes it is about craving perfection. The mind imagines how things must unfold perfectly, how every step must be controlled, how every detail must align. This too is imagination misused. Instead of creating compassion, it creates impossible standards. Instead of opening space, it narrows the path until you cannot breathe. Recognizing this pattern allows you to soften the demand for perfection and open to the truth of impermanence. Nothing will ever unfold exactly as imagined, and that is not failure, but life. The Buddha pointed often to the role of perception in shaping experience. What you perceive is not raw reality, but filtered reality. The mind overlays interpretation, memory, expectation. Anxiety shows this most clearly. The event is neutral, but imagination covers it with a film of fear. By seeing through this film, you reclaim reality as it is. A pause in conversation is no longer rejection, it is simply silence. A cloud overhead is no longer an omen, it is simply weather. When imagination is unchained, things return to their simplicity. You can see this in the body as well. The anxious mind envisions danger and the body responds with fight or flight. But when you redirect imagination, the body shifts. Visualizing calm, recalling compassion, sensing the stability of the earth beneath you, these images soothe the nervous system. Science confirms what Buddhism has long taught: the mind and body are not separate. Imagination shapes physiology. By using it wisely, you not only free the mind but heal the body. This practice also extends into daily life beyond meditation. When facing a difficult meeting, instead of imagining disaster, you can visualize yourself speaking calmly, listening openly, and leaving with peace. When approaching rest, instead of imagining restless nights, you can picture the body sinking gently into ease, the breath flowing like waves. These are not delusions, but training. You are teaching the mind to expect peace instead of chaos, to prepare for clarity instead of fear. Over time, these seeds take root, and anxiety weakens. The danger is not the existence of imagination, but forgetting that it is imagination. When you see it as just one tool of the mind, you gain freedom. When you mistake it for reality, you lose it. This is why mindfulness is essential. Awareness holds imagination gently, reminding you that it is a creation, not the ground itself. With this awareness, you can use imagination as an ally instead of a master. Some teachers describe anxiety as artistry gone wrong. The anxious mind is like a painter with endless skill, but who chooses only to paint storms. The paintings are vivid, convincing, full of detail, but they are still only paintings. The same brush could paint sunlight, mountains, open fields, or still water. The skill is not the problem, the choice of subject is. Buddhism invites you to take the brush back and choose differently. Over time, as this practice deepens, imagination itself begins to quiet. You no longer need to project so much because the present becomes rich enough. Anxiety shrinks not only because you redirect imagination, but because you outgrow the need to fill every silence with pictures. Reality, seen directly, is more vivid than any creation. The colors of the world, the texture of breath, the warmth of connection, all of these outshine anxious projections. Imagination remains, but it becomes servant, not master. This transformation is not immediate. Anxiety may still rise, the painter may still reach for stormy colors, but each time you notice, each time you redirect, each time you rest in awareness, the habit weakens. Slowly, the gallery of your mind fills with new works, images of compassion, spaces of calm, visions of freedom. Anxiety may visit, but it no longer dominates. The heart learns that Imagination, once chained to fear, can be freed to serve wisdom. And in that freedom, you discover peace was never far away. It was only hidden beneath the weight of false pictures. When you see through them, when you use imagination as a path instead of a prison, life opens into effortless clarity. Anxiety dissolves not because the mind stopped creating, but because it began creating in harmony with truth. The tool that once enslaved you becomes the bridge that sets you free. When the grip of imagination is freed from fear and directed toward clarity, the mind begins to breathe again. The storms of anxious projections weaken, yet even in this new space, the seeds of worry sometimes try to sprout. They look for soil in your habits, in your reactions, in the way you meet the world. If the ground of the heart is fertile with patience, generosity, and equanimity, those seeds find no place to take root. The Buddha called these qualities the parami, the perfections cultivated over lifetimes, the virtues that turn life itself into effortless peace. Anxiety grows in places where the heart resists reality. Patience is the medicine for this restlessness. When you learn to wait without agitation, you cut off worry at its root. Anxiety thrives on urgency, on the thought that things must change now, that discomfort must be removed immediately. Patience teaches the opposite, that all things unfold in their time, that forcing only deepens suffering. With patience, waiting is no longer torment, but trust. The heart no longer panics in delay, and in that trust, anxiety cannot survive. Generosity is another perfection that dissolves worry. Fear often rises from self-concern. What will happen to me? How will I be safe? How will I be seen? Generosity flips the focus outward. When the heart opens to giving, to relieving the burdens of others, the chains of self-preoccupation loosen. Anxiety weakens because the mind is no longer circling around its own protection. In giving, you discover a freedom larger than fear. Even small acts, a kind word, a gesture of help, create a spaciousness where worry cannot dominate. Equanimity is perhaps the deepest antidote. It is the steady heart that remains balanced amid gain and loss, praise and blame, success and failure. Anxiety thrives on swings between extremes. It feeds on the highs of expectation and the lows of disappointment. Equanimity cuts through both. It does not mean indifference, it means stability. When you cultivate equanimity, events no longer throw you into turmoil. The heart meets both joy and pain with dignity, and worry has nothing to cling to. The parami are not abstract ideals. They are practical tools for daily life. When you are patient with a difficult coworker, you are not only avoiding conflict, you are training the mind not to flare into anxious reaction. When you give time or resources to someone in need, you are not only helping them, you are loosening the grip of fear that hoards and clings. When you stay steady during uncertain times, you are not only surviving, you are showing the mind that balance is possible even in chaos. Each perfection works together, reinforcing the others. Patience makes generosity possible because it slows the rush of self-concern. Generosity deepens equanimity because it teaches the joy of release. Equanimity strengthens patience because it removes the demand for things to bend instantly to your will. Together, they weave a net strong enough to hold the mind steady even when worry tries to stir. There is also a karmic dimension. The cultivation of parami plants seeds for future conditions of peace. Patience today creates circumstances tomorrow where you are less likely to face turmoil. Generosity today builds networks of support that ease future hardship. Equanimity today creates resilience that protects you from collapse in future challenges. Worry, which often fears what tomorrow will bring, is silenced by the knowledge that you are actively shaping tomorrow through virtue. Consider how anxiety often arises in relationships. Without patience, every flaw in another feels unbearable. Without generosity, every interaction becomes a transaction to protect yourself. Without equanimity, every disagreement feels like rejection. But with the parami, these same situations transform. Patience allows space for others to be imperfect. Generosity creates joy in giving rather than fear of loss. Equanimity steadies the heart so that differences do not fracture peace. Worry about relationships loses ground because the soil is no longer fertile for it. The practice of the perfections is also subtle. They are not simply behaviors but attitudes of the heart. Patience is not gritting your teeth, it is softening into the flow of time. Generosity is not giving from obligation, it is the joy of release. Equanimity is not detachment, it is the warmth of presence without clinging. When cultivated deeply, these qualities shift the very atmosphere of your being. Anxiety cannot grow in such air. Meditation is one way to strengthen these perfections. Sitting with discomfort trains patience. Offering loving kindness in meditation trains generosity of heart. Observing thoughts without attachment trains equanimity. But daily life offers countless opportunities as well. Every delay, every chance to give, every swing of fortune is a chance to practice. The world itself becomes the ground where parami ripen. The ripening of these qualities is not immediate. Just as a fruit grows slowly, nourished by sun and rain, the perfections mature through repeated practice. At first, patience may last only moments before irritation returns. Generosity may feel small, equanimity fragile. But each act is a seed, and seeds accumulate. Over time, the soil of the heart changes. Worry, which once sprouted easily, finds no ground. This is why the path of parami is called effortless living. Not because life offers no challenges, but because the mind no longer wastes energy on resistance, clinging, and fear. Effort becomes natural action, not struggle. Living itself becomes practice, and practice becomes joy. The restless search for safety and certainty quiets because the heart has found a stability that conditions cannot shake. The Buddha himself is described as embodying these perfections fully. His patience with those who attacked him, his generosity in teaching tirelessly, his equanimity in the face of both reverence and hostility, these qualities freed him from the soil in which worry grows. Following his path means not trying to erase worry by force, but cultivating virtues so deep that worry cannot survive. When you meet anxiety now, instead of despairing, you can ask, which perfection is needed here? Perhaps patience, to rest in the unfolding of events. Perhaps generosity, to shift focus from self to others. Perhaps equanimity, to balance in the storm. Each worry becomes an invitation to deepen a virtue. Slowly, worry itself becomes teacher, guiding you toward the perfections that dissolve it. As these qualities mature, life begins to carry a new rhythm. You move through challenges with steadiness, through changes with openness, through relationships with kindness. The heart feels lighter not because the world changed, but because your response did. Worry no longer finds a foothold. Anxiety no longer dictates the script. What remains is the effortless flow of a life rooted in virtue, a life where the perfections shine like steady stars, guiding you through every dark night into unshakable peace. When the heart ripens through patience, generosity, and equanimity, the restless grip of worry begins to loosen. Yet even with these perfections alive in daily life, a subtler truth must be faced. Anxiety is not only a personal burden, it is also an act of harm against the very moment you are living. The Buddha spoke of ahimsa, non-violence, not only in how we treat other beings, but in how we treat the flow of time itself. To worry is to strike against the present, to wound what is here by rejecting it in favor of ghosts of future or echoes of past. The present moment asks nothing but presence. It offers breath, sensation, awareness, the direct texture of reality. Worry attacks this gift by turning away from it, by overlaying it with stories of what may or may not happen. This rejection is subtle violence. It is not blood or bruises, but it is aggression nonetheless. It tears at the wholeness of now, forcing life to bend under imagined conditions. In this way, worry is not harmless. It is a quiet form of harm. Non-violence toward the present is the foundation of effortless living. When you meet each moment without aggression, without demanding it be other than it is, peace arises naturally. The breath flows without interference. The body rests without tension. The mind no longer splits itself between what is and what could be. This is why the Buddha again and again pointed to mindfulness of the present as the path to liberation. To be here fully is to live without violence toward time. Think of how anxiety steals from the now. A meal loses its taste because you are already worrying about tomorrow. A conversation loses depth because you are rehearsing what comes next. Sleep is lost because the mind is trapped in scenes that have not yet unfolded. Each moment is harmed, discarded, sacrificed to phantoms. This is violence, subtle but relentless. Non-violence begins with refusing to abandon what is here. The practice of non-harming the present does not mean denying responsibility for the future. Plans may still be made, goals still pursued. But when planning turns into worry, when the mind ceases to engage directly and instead assaults the moment with fear, the practice is to step back, to return to breath, to honor what is unfolding right now. In that honoring, you are practicing ahimsa at the deepest level. This shift is radical. We are conditioned to believe worry is caring, that to be anxious is to prepare, to anticipate, to protect. But the Dharma reveals that true care comes from presence, not violence against presence. When you are fully here, you respond wisely to conditions as they arise. When you are lost in worry, you act from distortion and fear. One nourishes, the other harms. Notice how the body reveals this aggression. Worry tightens the chest, clenches the jaw, knots the stomach. These are the scars of violence against now. The body is forced into battle posture for enemies that do not exist. Non-violence soothes this tension. With mindfulness, the breath softens, the shoulders drop, the jaw releases. The body reflects peace when the mind ceases to attack the present. This also changes how you meet suffering. Pain will come, illness, loss, disappointment. But pain is the first arrow, worry the second. The first arrow is inevitable, the second is optional. To worry is to stab the present twice. Non-violence toward time means you bear only the pain that is real, not the pain that is invented. This alone lightens life enormously. There is also a deeper compassion here. When you refuse to harm the present with worry, you are not only freeing yourself, you are freeing others. An anxious parent cannot fully see their child. A worried friend cannot fully listen. A restless worker cannot fully contribute. By resting in the present, you give the gift of presence to others. You stop attacking the moment and begin to nourish it, creating peace that radiates outward. Meditation is direct training in this non-violence. Sitting, you notice the urge to drift into thought, into stories of what could be. Each time you return to the breath, you are practicing ahimsa toward now. You are saying, "This moment is enough. I will not abandon it." Over time, this becomes natural. Daily life becomes meditation in motion. Walking, eating, working, all become acts of honoring the present instead of wounding it with worry. The fruits of this practice are profound. The more you honor the present, the more you discover its richness. The taste of food, the sound of birds, the texture of breath, all reveal themselves as extraordinary once you stop striking against them. Anxiety had dulled them, painted them over with fear. Non-violence restores their vividness. Life itself becomes brighter, more whole, more real. It is also important to see how worry keeps you enslaved to time. By constantly living in futures that never arrive, you are never truly alive. Non-violence toward the present frees you from this slavery. You step out of the prison of what if and into the freedom of what is. This is not passivity, it is liberation. From this ground, wise action flows more easily because it arises from clarity rather than panic. The Buddha often described enlightenment as the end of agitation. Agitation is nothing but violence against what is. To reach liberation, the mind must cease this aggression. Each moment of mindfulness, each act of non-harming toward now, is a step on this path. Worry weakens, peace strengthens, and the heart grows still. In this way, non-violence toward time is not abstract philosophy, but a daily discipline. Every time anxiety arises, you are given a choice: to attack the present with fear or to honor it with awareness. Each time you choose awareness, you train the heart. Each time you refrain from aggression, you build peace. Slowly, the habit shifts. Worry, once automatic, becomes less frequent. The present, once overlooked, becomes the home where you truly live, and as this home becomes stable, life transforms. You no longer rush past moments in search of safety. You no longer destroy the present with endless projections. You live here, now, fully, gently. Anxiety cannot root itself in such soil. Effortless living blossoms not from control of the future, but from non-violence toward the present. And in that peace, you find the clarity and freedom the Buddha promised, a life untouched by the violence of worry, a life rooted in the simple, luminous truth of now. When worry is seen as violence against the present and the heart learns to stop striking at the moment with restless fear, a new depth of clarity emerges. Yet there is still a root fear that hides beneath all others, the silent thread woven through almost every anxious thought, the fear of death. Every worry about health, reputation, or future security is tied in some way to the fragile knowledge that this life will end. To meet this fear directly is not despair, but liberation. The Buddha gave us the practice of maranasati, mindfulness of death, not to darken the heart, but to free it from trivial anxieties and awaken urgency for what truly matters. Most people live as though death is a distant rumor, something reserved for the very old, the very sick, or the unlucky. But the truth is closer and more certain than the next breath. Mortality is not a possibility. It is the one certainty woven into existence. To reflect on this daily is not morbid, it is medicine. It sharpens perspective, dissolves petty worries, and pulls life into focus. What once seemed like unbearable anxieties shrink when set beside the certainty of death. The awkward conversation, the small failure, the delayed plan all lose their weight when you remember that everything, including you, will pass. This reflection creates savega, a spiritual urgency. It is the jolt of clarity that shakes you from distraction, reminding you that time is not infinite and that the work of the heart cannot be postponed. Worry thrives on the illusion that there will always be more time to fix things, more time to prepare, more time to prove yourself. Death contemplation cuts through that illusion. It tells you, this breath could be the last. The future you obsess over may never arrive. What then is left to worry about except living this moment well? When you hold mortality close, life becomes simpler. You stop giving energy to things that drain you. Grudges lose their flavor, because who wants to waste their finite days clinging to bitterness? Comparisons fade, because no amount of status can shield you from the truth of impermanence. Even fear of embarrassment shrinks, because in the face of death, what is a little awkwardness? Death contemplation acts like fire burning away the layers of pettiness, leaving only what is real. This practice also brings deep ease. At first, reflecting on death may bring fear. The ego resists the thought of ending, of dissolving into what cannot be controlled. But with repetition, fear softens into acceptance. You begin to see that death is not an enemy but part of the natural rhythm. Just as day yields to night, just as seasons change, life gives way to death. To accept this is to stop fighting the inevitable, to release the tension of denial. In this release, the heart rests. Buddhist teachers often advise contemplating death not only as an abstract truth, but as an immediate possibility. Reflecting, "I could die today, before the sun sets," is not pessimism, it is alignment with reality. None of us are promised tomorrow. To carry this reflection does not paralyze action, it energizes it. You begin to speak words of love instead of postponing them. You act on what matters instead of delaying for a perfect moment. You live without the arrogance of thinking there will always be more chances. This awareness also transforms relationships. When you remember that those you love are also mortal, irritation softens into tenderness. The small annoyances lose their bite, because you know your time together is precious and fleeting. Arguments are seen in perspective. Is this worth wasting one of the limited days you have together? Contemplation of death does not distance you from others, it deepens your connection, making each encounter more vivid, more sincere, more compassionate. It is equally powerful in dissolving fear of the unknown. Much worry arises from clinging to control, from trying to predict outcomes. But death itself is the great unknown, the ultimate release of control. To practice meeting it in contemplation prepares you for meeting uncertainty in daily life. If you can sit with the truth of mortality, then facing the unpredictability of a job, a relationship, or a challenge becomes lighter. Anxiety loses its grip because you have trained with the deepest uncertainty of all. This practice also anchors gratitude. When you know your days are limited, every sunrise becomes a gift, every meal a blessing, every breath a treasure. Worry narrows your view to what is lacking. Death contemplation widens it to what is already given. Gratitude naturally arises, not as forced positivity, but as recognition of the fragile miracle of being alive at all. From gratitude, peace flows and worry withers. There is also an ethical dimension. Remembering death keeps you aligned with what matters. It becomes harder to justify harmful actions when you know that soon you will leave this world. It becomes easier to act kindly, to forgive, to give, because you see that what remains is not possessions or status but the imprint of your heart. Worry about appearances and achievements fades in the face of this truth. What matters is the goodness you cultivate and share before the final breath. Contemplation of death also breaks the illusion of permanence that feeds anxiety. Worry often clings to the idea that something must last forever: health, youth, relationships, success. But nothing does. By reflecting on death, you see impermanence everywhere. Instead of fearing it, you accept it. The flower fades, the seasons shift, the body ages, the breath ceases. When you stop demanding permanence, anxiety has nothing to feed on. You live aligned with the flow of change, at peace with what arises and falls away. Some may think this practice will lead to hopelessness, but the opposite is true. It leads to empowerment. When you know time is short, you stop postponing meaning. You stop living half asleep. You stop wasting days in cycles of worry. Death contemplation awakens you to the urgency of freedom, the urgency of love, the urgency of living with integrity. This urgency is not frantic. It is clear, steady, and deeply alive. In meditation, reflecting on death can take many forms. You may simply repeat, "This breath could be my last." You may visualize your own body returning to the earth, seeing its impermanence directly. You may reflect on the countless beings who have died, realizing that you walk a path shared by all. Each method deepens awareness that life is fragile and fleeting. The more you practice, the more your heart loosens its grip on trivial worries and opens to what is timeless. Daily life offers countless reminders if you are willing to see them. A fallen leaf, a faded photograph, a funeral procession, each one is a teacher pointing to the same truth. Instead of turning away, you can turn toward these reminders with mindfulness. Each reflection strengthens wisdom. Each acceptance frees you from worry. Death is no longer a shadow stalking you, but a guide leading you toward presence. Ultimately, death contemplation destroys trivial worry because it brings you face to face with the essence of the path. The Buddha taught that liberation is freedom from clinging, and nothing reveals clinging more sharply than facing death. To accept mortality is to release the desperate grasping that fuels anxiety. What remains is a mind unburdened, a heart at ease, a life lived fully in the present. When you carry this reflection into each day, worry loses its power. The fear of minor discomforts, small failures, or imagined futures shrinks against the vastness of mortality. You see clearly that time is too precious to waste in agitation. You live urgently, but calmly, aware of the shortness of life and the depth of its value. And in this awareness, you discover the ease that comes from aligning with truth, the ease of living fully, here and now, without the chains of trivial worry. When the truth of mortality is brought close through contemplation, the weight of trivial concerns dissolves, and the heart learns to value only what is essential. Yet even with this clarity, worry can still appear, rising suddenly like a creature crossing your path. It is here that the Buddha offered one of his most powerful metaphors, the snake. He taught that the way you handle worry determines whether it harms you or leaves you unharmed. To grasp it clumsily is to invite venom. To hold it with wisdom is to remain safe. The teaching is simple yet profound. Worry itself is not the enemy, but your way of relating to it can turn it into suffering or into harmless passing. When anxiety rises, the instinct is to grab tightly, to wrestle with it, to fix it through force. This grasping is the same as seizing a snake by the wrong end. The more you fight, the more it thrashes, the deeper its fangs sink. The mind believes that control will bring safety, but, in truth, clinging turns fear into poison. The harder you resist, the more violent the struggle becomes. The snake does not harm simply because it exists. It harms because of the way you hold it. The Buddha's simile shows that wisdom is not to crush fear, but to change your relationship to it. Holding the snake at the right distance, by the correct part of the body, makes it harmless. In the same way, holding worry with mindful distance removes its power. You do not deny it, you do not collapse into it, you simply give it space. This space is what turns venom into nothing more than passing movement. Mindful distance begins with recognition. When worry rises, the first step is to say, "This is worry." Naming it brings clarity. Without this recognition, worry merges with identity, and you believe, "I am anxious." With recognition, the shift occurs. Anxiety is here, but it is not me. This small distance is already the safe grip. It prevents the bite of identification, the fusing of self with fear. The next step is non-grasping. Most people, when faced with anxiety, try to suppress it or indulge it. Suppression is pushing it down, pretending it does not exist. Indulgence is clinging to the story, feeding it with endless scenarios. Both are forms of grasping, both are like seizing the snake wrongly. Non-grasping is different. It is resting in awareness, allowing worry to rise and fall without either pushing or feeding. The snake is present, but it cannot bite because you are not holding it by the wrong end. This practice reveals a deeper truth. Worry is movement, not substance. When you give it mindful distance, you see that it shifts constantly. Thoughts come and go, sensations rise and fade. The permanence that seemed so heavy dissolves. You realize that anxiety only felt solid because you clutched it. Released, it flows and disappears like smoke. The simile also points to skill. Just as handling a snake requires careful technique, handling worry requires training. Meditation is this training ground. Sitting quietly, you allow thoughts to arise. At first, the instinct to grab them is strong. You chase stories, you wrestle with fears. But as mindfulness strengthens, you learn to stay steady, to let them pass. Each moment of release is practice in safe handling. Over time, you become skilled. Worry may appear, but it no longer bites. This skill is not limited to meditation. Daily life provides endless opportunities. A critical comment, a financial setback, a health concern, all are snakes crossing your path. If you grab them with panic, you suffer. If you hold them with calm awareness, they pass. This does not mean ignoring responsibilities. It means facing them without clinging to fear. You still act, but action arises from clarity, not from the venom of anxiety. There is also a teaching here about wisdom itself. The Buddha often warned against grasping even his teachings wrongly, comparing it again to mishandling a snake. Clinging rigidly to ideas can become another form of suffering. In the same way, clinging to the thought of worry, whether as a problem to solve or as an identity to own, creates harm. Freedom lies in flexibility, in holding lightly, in knowing when to let go. This perspective also dismantles shame. Many people feel guilty for being anxious, as if worry itself were failure. But the snake simile shows that the issue is not the appearance of fear, but the way you meet it. Even skilled practitioners encounter worry. What changes is their handling. They do not grasp it as self. They do not feed it with resistance. They hold it wisely and let it pass. Knowing this relieves the extra burden of guilt and allows gentle patience with the practice. The body confirms this truth. When you grasp worry, muscles tighten, breath shortens, the nervous system floods with stress. When you hold it lightly, the body softens. The same stimulus that once brought panic becomes manageable. Physiological studies confirm what the Dharma teaches. Perception and reaction change bodily outcomes. The difference is not in the snake itself, but in your grip. This simile also expands into relationships. Worry often arises about others, their choices, their opinions, their safety. To grasp them tightly, to try to control outcomes, is like seizing the snake wrongly. You create conflict, tension, and endless fear. To hold them with mindful distance is to allow them to be, to care without clinging, to support without possession. In this way, relationships become freer, more compassionate, less poisoned by worry. Handling worry without grasping also transforms how you meet uncertainty. Anxiety thrives in the unknown because the instinct is to clutch at certainty. But uncertainty is the snake itself. It can be handled safely, if not seized in desperation. When you learn to rest with not knowing, to hold it with gentle awareness, uncertainty becomes less threatening. Life becomes less about control and more about presence. Over time, this practice changes the very texture of experience. Worry still appears, but it feels lighter, less sticky. The mind knows how to hold it. Just as a skilled handler no longer fears the snake's presence, the practitioner no longer fears anxiety. The appearance of worry becomes simply another aspect of life, not a crisis. Freedom grows not from erasing fear, but from mastering the way of meeting it. The Buddha's simile is not a warning of danger, but a promise of possibility. Worry need not poison your life. The bite comes only from clinging. With mindful distance, even the most frightening thought becomes harmless. This is the path of effortless living, not avoiding the snake, not denying its presence, but meeting it with the wisdom of right handling. In that skill, anxiety loses its power, and the heart rests in peace. When the snake is handled with mindful distance and the bite of worry loses its sting, another truth begins to show itself. Even when fear no longer poisons you, the mind still tends to reach forward, pointing itself towards signs, outcomes, and imagined destinations. This is the hidden engine of anxiety, a constant aiming at something that has not yet arrived. The Buddha called this tendency a subtle form of grasping, and he offered the path of apranihita aimlessness, or signless liberation, as the way to end it. To live without aim is not to drift without care, but to rest fully in presence, free from the anxiety that comes from chasing signs of the future. Anxious thought is almost always directed at something ahead. It projects into a conversation that has not happened, a result that has not been decided, a danger that has not appeared. This aiming feels like responsibility, but it is actually restlessness. The mind insists on leaning forward, trying to secure a sign that it will be safe, respected, or successful. The problem is that no sign ever satisfies. Once one is reached, another appears. Aimlessness reveals the truth. Safety, respect, and success are not guaranteed by chasing signs. They are illusions fed by grasping. Aimlessness is not laziness. It is not abandoning care or responsibility. It is the freedom of letting go of the need for life to always confirm your projections. To practice it is to live without demanding that the next moment prove your worth, your safety, or your control. This is why the Buddha called it wishless liberation. Anxiety is fueled by wishing. Wishing for certainty, wishing for perfection, wishing for things to unfold according to plan. When wish is dropped, peace arrives instantly. Think about how often worry builds around outcomes. Before an exam, the mind points at a grade. Before a meeting, it points at approval. Before a journey, it points at arrival. These aims consume energy and breed restlessness. Yet none of them exist in the present. The exam, the meeting, the arrival are only signs the mind has created. Aimlessness cuts through by returning you to what is real: the breath, the step, the task at hand. The sign dissolves, and so does the anxiety bound to it. This practice does not mean you stop making plans. Plans arise naturally. The body still moves forward in time. The difference is whether you cling to the plan as a sign of your security. With aimlessness, you still prepare, but you hold no demand that the result validate you. This loosens the grip of fear. Work becomes action for its own sake, not a desperate chase for signs of success. Relationships become connections for their own sake, not a hunt for signs of approval. Life itself becomes living for its own sake, not a scramble for signs of safety. Aimlessness is also deeply connected to non-self. Anxiety assumes a self that must be protected, confirmed, or perfected. It aims at signs to prove that this self is safe and real. But the Buddha taught that the self is a construction, impermanent and conditioned. When you stop aiming at signs to confirm it, the illusion weakens. Without the burden of constantly proving yourself, the heart rests. Aimlessness is freedom not just from worry, but from the restless search to solidify what cannot be solidified. This teaching also dismantles comparison. Much worry arises from measuring yourself against others, their success, their beauty, their possessions. This is another form of aiming. You point at the sign of another's life and demand that yours match it. Aimlessness ends this race. When you stop aiming at external signs, you return to your own ground. You see that peace does not require validation from outside markers. It only requires letting go of the craving for signs at all. The practice of aimlessness can be felt in meditation. At first, even in stillness, the mind aims, I want this session to be calm. I want insight. I want bliss. Each of these wishes creates tension, and when they are not met, frustration follows. Aimlessness in meditation means sitting without demand, resting with the breath as it is, with the mind as it is. No sign is required. This simple shift dissolves much restlessness. The present becomes enough. In daily life, aimlessness is practiced by noticing whenever you are leaning into the future. When you catch yourself waiting for a message, craving a result, longing for recognition, you pause and return. You ask, what is real right now? The body sitting, the breath moving, the moment unfolding. This breaks the habit of chasing signs and brings you back to effortless presence. The more often you practice, the more natural it becomes. There is also a great joy in aimlessness. Worry narrows your life to targets and outcomes. Without them, the richness of the present expands. A walk is no longer a route to somewhere, it is the walk itself. A conversation is no longer a means to approval, it is connection itself. Work is no longer just a step toward recognition, it is expression itself. By ending the chase for signs, you reclaim the fullness of life that was always here but overlooked. The Buddha described liberation as signless, wishless, aimless, because anxiety and craving always point. They grasp at images, they cling to symbols, they chase the future. Peace cannot be found by following that direction. It is found by dropping the aim entirely, by realizing that what you seek is already here when you stop demanding proof. Aimlessness also trains courage. Anxiety often hides in the thought, what if I don't get what I want? What if things don't go as planned? By practicing aimlessness, you face these questions directly. You release the need for assurance. You learn to live without signs, without guarantees, without promises. This is not recklessness but deep trust, trust that presence itself is enough. In this trust, fear loses its ground. Over time, this practice transforms the very structure of your mind. Where once every thought leaned forward into desire and fear, now the mind rests in itself. The constant aiming softens. You no longer wake each day asking, what will I achieve to prove my worth? But how will I live this moment fully? This subtle shift removes layers of anxiety that years of striving could never resolve. Aimlessness is the opposite of resignation. It does not mean you give up effort. It means effort is freed from desperation. You act with clarity, but you do not demand that life give you signs in return. You let results unfold as they will, meeting them with equanimity. This is why effortless living flows naturally from aimlessness. Without signs to chase, without wishes to cling to, you move with lightness. Worry cannot survive in such freedom. The Buddha's path is not about becoming something else, but about letting go of what binds you. Worry binds by aiming, by chaining the heart to signs of future outcomes. Aimlessness unchains. It reveals that the peace you sought in signs was never in them. It was always in the simple presence of this moment, free, wishless, enough. When you taste this even briefly, you know why the Buddha called it liberation. Living this way, anxiety no longer rules. The mind no longer burns with endless aiming. The heart no longer waits for proof of safety. Life becomes whole in itself. Each breath, each step, each word is complete. And in that completeness, worry dissolves, leaving only the effortless presence of freedom. When the mind releases its restless aiming and discovers the ease of aimlessness, an even deeper insight begins to unfold. The habit of chasing signs is not just a personal quirk, it is the very mechanism that sustains the wheel of samsara. Every anxious thought, every clinging to a future outcome, every restless attempt to control the uncontrollable becomes fuel for the cycle of birth and death. Worry may seem small, but in truth it is one of the great engines of bondage. To let go of worry, even in small moments, is to weaken samsara itself and to point the heart toward nirvana. Samsara is not a place, but a process. It is the endless movement of craving, aversion, and ignorance that spins the wheel of becoming. Worry is one of its most subtle tools because it convinces you that agitation is necessary. It tells you that without fear, you will not survive, you will not be prepared, you will not succeed. This lie keeps you chained, feeding energy into the very cycle that exhausts you. The Buddha revealed that liberation is not attained by escaping the world, but by starving the forces that keep the wheel turning. Worry is one of those forces, and each act of release is an act of rebellion against samsara itself. Think of how worry sustains craving. Anxiety often begins with the thought that something is lacking, that you must secure safety, recognition, or stability. That lack creates craving. You reach, you grasp, you cling. Samsara thrives on this reaching. The more you feed it, the more it grows. By letting go of worry, you cut off the story of lack. You begin to rest in sufficiency, and in doing so, you stop turning the wheel with every thought. Worry also feeds aversion. It paints pictures of danger, rejection, and failure, and you respond by pushing against life. You resist the present, reject uncertainty, and fear loss. This resistance strengthens samsara because it deepens the illusion that peace can only come when conditions are perfect. Letting go of worry means ceasing to strike against life. You stop fighting shadows, and in that release, the aversive energy weakens. Samsara loses momentum when you no longer resist what is. Ignorance is the third root, and worry feeds it as well. Anxiety convinces you that your thoughts are reality, that your projections are truth. It hides impermanence and interdependence behind a curtain of fear. As long as you take these illusions as real, samsara continues. Mindfulness tears the curtain. Seeing worry as worry, seeing thought as thought, reveals its emptiness. This direct seeing is wisdom, and wisdom is what exhausts samsara at the root. The connection between worry and samsara can also be seen in the chain of dependent origination. Ignorance gives rise to formations, which give rise to consciousness, which leads to name and form, and so on until aging and death. Worry is a modern mask of this ancient chain. It is ignorance forming restless habits, consciousness grasping at projections, clinging leading to becoming. To let go of worry is to interrupt this chain. Even for a moment, when you rest without agitation, the cycle weakens. That pause is a taste of nirvana, the peace of non-becoming. Nirvana is often described as the extinguishing of a flame. Samsara is the burning of craving and fear, and worry is the smoke that suffocates you. Each act of release is like removing fuel from the fire. The flame weakens, the smoke clears. Nirvana is not a place you arrive at, but the exhaustion of this burning. When worry no longer finds soil, the fire of samsara fades, and what remains is peace that does not depend on conditions. This truth gives profound meaning to every small moment of practice. When you catch yourself spiraling in fear and you return to the breath, it may feel minor, but in truth, you are participating in the very exhaustion of samsara. When you refrain from feeding anxious stories, you are stepping closer to nirvana. The path is not built only on great insights or dramatic renunciations, it is built on the daily, patient refusal to keep spinning the wheel. This perspective also brings dignity to the practice of letting go. Worry often feels humiliating, as if being anxious is weakness. But when you see it in the light of the Dharma, the act of release becomes noble. To let go of worry is to align yourself with awakening. It is not a small victory, it is participation in the great work of liberation. Each time you resist feeding samsara, you affirm the possibility of freedom not just for yourself, but for all beings. Worry often convinces you that it is protecting you. In truth, it is protecting samsara. It guards the cycle, feeding it with your energy, keeping you from tasting the peace of release. By exposing this, the Buddha offered the greatest gift, the knowledge that you are not trapped forever. The wheel turns only because you give it fuel. Stop feeding it, and it slows. Let go completely, and it stops. Nirvana is described as the end of worry and lamentation. This is not metaphorical. The liberated one no longer circles in anxiety about future or past. They live fully in the present, unbound by craving or fear. This does not mean they never face challenges, but they face them without the extra burden of samsaric agitation. The mind rests in clarity, the heart in ease. This is the exhaustion of samsara, not the destruction of life, but the destruction of the restless burning that distorts life. Daily practice can make this real. When you wake and the first anxious thought appears, instead of feeding it, you notice it as samsara trying to draw you back in. You breathe, you let go, and in that moment you participate in nirvana. When a difficult situation arises and you feel the surge of worry, you remind yourself, this is craving, this is fear, this is the wheel. You do not collapse into it, you return to presence. Each return is a moment of liberation. Over time, the effect compounds. Where once your life was a chain of anxious reactions, it becomes a flow of mindful responses. Samsara weakens, not because the world changes, but because you no longer fuel it with worry. This is the quiet revolution of the Dharma. Freedom arises not from changing external conditions, but from exhausting the internal fires. This teaching also deepens compassion. When you see others caught in worry, you know they are feeding samsara unknowingly. You do not judge them, you recognize the shared struggle. Your own practice of letting go becomes not only for yourself, but as a light for others. In freeing yourself, you help weaken the cycle for all. The Buddha's message is clear. Samsara thrives on worry. Nirvana begins with its exhaustion. To worry less is not merely a psychological technique, it is the path to awakening. Each time you let go, you participate in the great turning of the wheel toward peace. Each act of release is a step away from bondage and a step toward freedom. And so, the practice continues. Breath by breath, moment by moment, you notice, you release, you rest. Samsara weakens, nirvana shines. The endless cycle of craving and fear begins to lose its grip, and the effortless peace that was always here begins to reveal itself. In the exhaustion of worry, you taste the exhaustion of samsara, and in that taste, you know that freedom is not a distant promise, but a living reality, available now. When the truth of samsara's exhaustion through letting go of worry becomes clear, the heart begins to recognize how suffering is compounded not only by craving, but by the unnecessary layers we add on top of what life already brings. Pain itself is unavoidable. Bodies age, circumstances shift, loss touches everyone. Yet much of the torment we feel is not from the raw experience, but from what we add to it. This is what the Buddha called the principle of the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain of life itself. The second arrow is the one we fire into our own hearts through worry, fear, resistance, and self-judgment. To understand this principle deeply is to discover how much suffering can be dropped instantly. The first arrow pierces sharply because it is real. A body falls ill, a loved one departs, a plan collapses, or a disappointment arrives. These events carry genuine pain. No practice denies this reality. But worry arises immediately afterward, creating stories, predictions, and judgments that multiply the suffering far beyond the original wound. The second arrow digs deeper than the first. It transforms pain into despair, challenge into paralysis, and difficulty into endless torment. An example makes this vivid. When sickness arises, the pain of the body is the first arrow. But worry says, what if this gets worse? What if I can never recover? What if my life is ruined? These thoughts create suffering larger than the illness itself. Or when rejection occurs, the pain of loss is the first arrow. But worry says, I am unworthy. No one will ever accept me. I am destined to be alone. Again, the second arrow strikes harder than the first. In both cases, the mind takes a moment of pain and multiplies it endlessly. This principle reveals that much of what we call anxiety is self-inflicted. Not in the sense of blame, but in the sense of unawareness. We shoot the second arrow without realizing it. The body flinches at the first, and before clarity arises, the mind adds another, then another, until the entire being feels pierced from every side. Understanding this process brings freedom, because it shows that while you cannot always prevent the first arrow, you can refuse to shoot the second. Refusing the second arrow does not mean suppressing pain. It means facing pain directly, without layering it with extra suffering. When grief comes, you allow grief. When disappointment arises, you feel it as it is. You do not deny the sting of the first arrow, but you refrain from adding stories, judgments, and fears that transform the sting into torment. This is where mindfulness becomes medicine. It keeps you present with the direct sensation instead of spiraling into imagined futures. Dropping the second arrow lightens life instantly. What once felt unbearable shrinks to its true size. A pain that seemed endless is revealed to be temporary. A difficulty that seemed catastrophic is revealed to be manageable. You begin to see that while life may always bring some form of discomfort, much of the suffering was never necessary. This realization brings relief not through changing circumstances, but through changing how you meet them. This teaching also reshapes relationships. Often, the first arrow comes from others' actions, a harsh word, a betrayal, a lack of understanding. That pain is real. But the second arrow is the story you create afterward. They always do this. No one respects me. I will never be valued. These thoughts stab again and again, long after the original event has passed. By recognizing this, you free yourself from reliving wounds. You still address harm wisely, but you do not let the second arrow keep you bound. The principle also changes how you view the past. Regret is a constant second arrow. The mistake was the first arrow. But the endless replaying of, I should have done differently, "I ruined everything, my life is broken," is self-inflicted. The past cannot be altered, but the arrows of regret can be dropped. Reflection may remain, lessons may be learned, but torment is unnecessary. In this way, the second arrow teaching heals old wounds by preventing you from striking yourself again in the present. It also applies to the future. Anticipatory anxiety is nothing but shooting arrows at yourself in advance. The future pain has not yet arrived. Often it never will, yet the mind fires arrow after arrow through worry. By practicing awareness, you catch this habit and release it. You stop preparing endless suffering for yourself, and you meet the future only when it truly arrives. The Buddha's teaching here is compassionate because it acknowledges the reality of pain while freeing you from the illusion that all suffering is inevitable. You cannot avoid the first arrow, but you can stop multiplying the wound. This insight gives agency. You are not helpless before anxiety. You can choose not to feed it. Every moment you refrain from firing the second arrow, you cultivate peace. Meditation makes this visible in real time. Sitting quietly, you may feel discomfort in the body, the first arrow. The mind then begins to complain, "This is unbearable. I can't do this. I am failing." These are second arrows. With mindfulness, you see them arise and you let them pass. You return to the raw sensation, perhaps unpleasant, but not catastrophic. In this way, meditation becomes training in refusing the second arrow. The teaching also deepens compassion for others. When you see someone drowning in worry, you know they are suffering not only from life's arrows, but from the extra arrows they fire into themselves. Instead of judgment, you feel empathy. You know how painful those arrows can be, because you have felt them yourself. Your compassion extends beyond their immediate pain to the unnecessary burden they carry, and you wish for them the freedom of dropping it. There is a subtle joy in recognizing the second arrow. Even in difficulty, you feel empowered because you know where freedom lies. You no longer despair at the inevitability of pain. You rest in the knowledge that much suffering is optional. This joy does not deny the weight of hardship, but it shines through as relief, as clarity, as the quiet strength of knowing you do not have to stab yourself again. This practice also builds resilience. When challenges arise, you face them more steadily because you know you will not multiply them with worry. You may still hurt, but the hurt does not define you. The arrow pierces, but you do not collapse under 1,000 imaginary wounds. Life becomes lighter, not because pain disappears, but because you no longer carry the extra arrows of your own making. The teaching of the second arrow is also a step toward ultimate liberation. Samsara is sustained by the countless arrows of craving and fear. Nirvana is the exhaustion of this barrage. Each time you drop a second arrow, you participate in that exhaustion. You weaken the cycle, you strengthen wisdom, and you move closer to peace that is not shaken by life's conditions. In daily life, this means cultivating constant awareness. When pain or challenge arises, you pause and ask, "Is this the first arrow, or am I adding more?" This simple question brings clarity. It prevents unconscious spirals. It reminds you that pain is part of life, but torment is optional. Over time, the habit of firing second arrows weakens, and peace becomes your natural response. As this habit fades, your whole being shifts. Anxiety loses its hold because its fuel was always the second arrow. Without those extra wounds, the heart rests more easily, the mind clears more quickly, and the body softens more naturally. You discover that even amid pain, freedom is possible. This is the gift of the Buddha's teaching, not a life without arrows, but a life without unnecessary arrows. And in that life, worry dissolves. leaving space for clarity, compassion, and ease. When the second arrow teaching becomes clear, the mind learns that much of suffering is avoidable, that the pain of life itself is heavy enough without adding layers of self-inflicted wounds. Yet even when we begin to drop those arrows, worry can still appear again and again. It rises not only from habits of thought, but also from the deep hindrances the Buddha warned about. These hindrances cloud the mind, weaken concentration, and block wisdom from arising. Among them, worry has its own name: uddhacca, kukucca, restlessness, and remorse. To see worry in this way is to unmask it, to know that it is not truth or insight, but one of the 5 barriers that obscure clarity. The 5 hindrances are desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. Together, they are like veils drawn over the mind, distorting perception and weakening the path. Worry's place among them is important. It is not classified as wisdom, nor as responsibility, nor as care. It is recognized directly as an obstacle. This shifts the entire perspective. Instead of honoring worry as necessary, we learn to see it as a visitor that clouds vision. By naming it a hindrance, we stop giving it power. Restlessness, the first half of uddhacca, is the mind's refusal to settle. It leaps from thought to thought, from fear to fear, unable to rest in the present. Remorse, the second half of kukucca, is the mind's fixation on mistakes and regrets, chewing endlessly on what cannot be undone. Together, they form the agitation we call worry. When these two rise, the mind cannot enter stillness, cannot absorb, cannot see deeply. It is like trying to look into a pool of water while someone keeps stirring the surface. To work with worry as a hindrance, the first step is recognition. Without knowing its nature, you treat it as fact. When worry arises, you believe its stories. But when you know it as a hindrance, you begin to step back. You say, "This is uddhacca, kukucca. This is restlessness and remorse, not truth." This simple recognition weakens its hold. It reframes the experience. Instead of an urgent command, worry becomes a known obstacle, a familiar cloud you need not obey. The Buddha offered many methods to overcome hindrances. For worry, one key method is calming the body and mind through attention to breath. Restlessness is movement, so the antidote is steadiness. As you focus on the breath, the body settles and the mind follows. This is not escape, but balance. By anchoring in the breath, you stop feeding the restless movements of thought. Over time, this practice teaches the mind that it can rest without danger. Another method is reflection on impermanence. Remorse clings to past mistakes as if they are fixed forever. But all phenomena, including actions and their effects, are impermanent. Conditions shift, consequences change, and new actions can create new patterns. By reflecting on impermanence, the sting of remorse softens. You recognize that no moment defines you eternally. Worry dissolves in the light of this truth. Worry as a hindrance also exposes its role in blocking deeper meditation. Concentration requires unification of mind, but worry scatters attention in every direction. Even small traces of restlessness prevent absorption. This is why the Buddha emphasized removing hindrances before entering deeper states. To free yourself from worry is not only to live with less anxiety, but also to prepare the ground for profound meditative joy. The placement of worry alongside desire, ill will, sloth, and doubt is also instructive. Each hindrance pulls the mind off balance in its own way. Desire pulls it forward into craving. Ill will pushes it into hostility. Sloth sinks it into dullness. Doubt paralyzes it with uncertainty. Worry pulls it sideways into agitation. Each one blocks clarity, and each one can be recognized and released. By seeing worry in this wider map, you recognize it not as unique to you, but as a universal challenge faced by all practitioners. This insight itself removes shame. The Buddha compared the hindrances to impurities in gold. Just as gold cannot shine when mixed with copper or lead, the mind cannot shine when covered with desire, anger, laziness, worry, or doubt. But when purified, gold glows brightly, and the mind too reveals its natural clarity. This image shows that the essence of the mind is not worry itself. Worry is only an impurity, removable, not permanent. Practical steps also support this process. Ethical living reduces remorse because the mind has fewer past actions to chew upon. Patience reduces restlessness because the mind learns to remain with what is instead of leaping ahead. Loving kindness counters self-judgment, turning the mind from harshness to gentleness. Each act of practice strengthens the conditions in which worry cannot thrive. Understanding worry as a hindrance also prevents you from mistaking it for moral duty. Many believe that to worry about others is to care. But the Buddha did not classify worry under compassion, he placed it under hindrances. True compassion is calm, clear, and wise. Worry is restless, clouded, and agitated. By making this distinction, you learn to replace anxious care with genuine compassion, which supports both yourself and others. Meditative observation deepens this insight. When you sit and watch worry arise, you see its texture. It is not solid, it vibrates with agitation. You notice how quickly it shifts from one thought to another. You notice how the body responds with tension, the breath with irregularity. By observing in this way, you see worry not as content but as process. This shift is powerful. Instead of believing the stories, you see the agitation itself. Once you see it as process, it loses its power to deceive. The 5 hindrances are not enemies to be destroyed, but conditions to be understood. When you understand worry as a hindrance, you stop fearing it. You see it as part of the path, something to recognize, work with, and release. This attitude is gentle and patient. It does not resist with violence, but responds with wisdom. Over time, the habit of feeding worry weakens, and the hindrance fades naturally. The fruits of this practice are profound. As worry lessens, concentration deepens. As concentration deepens, insight arises. As insight arises, liberation approaches. The path is not abstract. It is lived in each moment you recognize and release a hindrance. Worry may still visit, but it no longer rules. It comes, you see it, you name it, you let it go. Slowly, the mind clears, like water settling after being stirred. The Buddha's map of the hindrances is a gift because it shows that anxiety is not a personal flaw, but a universal obstacle. Knowing this brings relief. You are not alone in facing worry. Every practitioner, from beginner to advanced, encounters it. What matters is not the appearance of hindrances, but the way you meet them. With awareness, patience, and practice, they weaken. And as they weaken, the natural peace of the mind shines through. To see worry as uddhacca kukucca is to strip it of its disguise. It is no longer a sign of care, nor a mark of identity. It is simply a hindrance, temporary, impermanent, not self. And knowing this, you need not be its prisoner. You can recognize it, release it, and walk forward on the path with clarity. In this recognition, anxiety loses its authority, and the heart begins to taste the effortless freedom that the Buddha pointed toward. When worry is seen clearly as one of the 5 hindrances, its disguise as something useful begins to dissolve. It is no longer confused with care, wisdom, or responsibility, but recognized as a force that blocks clarity and peace. Yet there is another layer to uncover. Beneath the restless movements of worry lies a subtler root, craving. What feels like concern often masks a thirst for certainty, control, or reassurance. The Buddha called this root lobha, greed, or grasping. To see worry as a subtle form of greed is to strip away its final disguise and reveal why it clings so tightly to the heart. At first, the idea that worry is greed can feel strange. Greed is usually linked to possessions, wealth, or status, not to restless nights and racing thoughts. But greed is broader than material hunger. It is the urge to grasp, to cling, to demand reality conform to your desires. Worry is fueled by this urge. The anxious mind is not simply noticing danger, it is craving certainty where none exists, craving safety that can never be absolute, craving control over the uncontrollable. In this light, worry is not an expression of love, but of subtle greed. Consider the craving for certainty. The mind wants guarantees that health will endure, that loved ones will be safe, that plans will unfold exactly as intended. Life offers no such guarantees, but worry keeps reaching anyway. Each what-if thought is the hand of greed stretching into the unknown, demanding answers, demanding certainty where none can be found. This craving is endless, because even if one answer appears, another question takes its place. The hunger is never satisfied, and the worry continues. Safety is another object of this subtle greed. The anxious mind longs for a world without risk, without loss, without threat. It grasps for safety, as if safety could be permanent. But all conditioned things are impermanent, and safety is always relative. To crave total safety is to crave the impossible. This impossible hunger is the source of much anxiety. When recognized as greed, it can be released, not by denying the need for protection, but by accepting that absolute safety is beyond reach. Control is perhaps the deepest craving beneath worry. The anxious mind wants the future to obey its plans, people to behave according to its wishes, conditions to unfold without surprise. This craving for control is insatiable because reality does not bend to personal will. When control slips, worry surges. But when you see worry as greed for control, you stop mistaking it for responsibility. You recognize it as clinging, and clinging can be released. This reframing changes everything. Instead of asking, "How do I stop worrying?" you begin to ask, "What am I craving right now?" The question exposes the root. Maybe it is craving certainty, maybe safety, maybe control. By naming the craving, you weaken it. The mask of care falls away, and the raw greed is revealed. And once revealed, it becomes easier to let go. Recognizing worry as greed also dissolves shame. Many people feel guilty for being anxious, as if worry proves weakness. But when you see it as craving, you understand it is simply one of the three poisons the Buddha described, no different in essence from desire for wealth or power. It is not a personal flaw but a universal tendency. This insight frees you from self-blame and directs your energy toward practice. The antidotes to greed apply here as well. Generosity loosens the grip of craving. When you practice giving, you train the heart to release rather than cling. Patience undermines the hunger for certainty, teaching you to rest in not knowing. Equanimity counters the craving for control, reminding you that outcomes need not bend to your will for peace to exist. By cultivating these virtues, you starve worry at its root. Meditation reveals this truth directly. Sitting quietly, you notice how anxious thoughts feel like grasping hands. They reach into the future, trying to seize outcomes. They clutch at people and events, demanding they stay fixed. With mindfulness, you begin to feel the tension of this grasping. You notice how greed tightens the chest, quickens the breath, hardens the jaw. Then, when you release, the body softens, the craving drops, and with it, the worry dissolves. This insight also transforms how you relate to others. Worry about loved ones often feels like love, but it is frequently craving in disguise. You want them to be safe, to succeed, to avoid pain not only for their sake, but because their suffering threatens your sense of security. This is not pure compassion, but subtle greed for your own peace through their circumstances. True compassion accepts that you cannot control another's path. It offers care without clinging, love without grasping. This love is spacious, and in that spaciousness, worry fades. Worry about reputation is another example. The craving here is for certainty that others will think well of you, for control over their perceptions. But perception is beyond your command, shifting with each person's mind and mood. To crave control over it is futile, and worry thrives in that futility. When you see it as greed, you learn to release it. Your worth no longer depends on others' opinions, but on the clarity of your own heart. The Buddha described greed as a fire. Worry is one of its subtlest flames, often unnoticed because it hides behind care. But it burns the mind just the same. Each craving thought is fuel for the fire, and each act of release is water that cools it. Over time, as craving weakens, the fire of worry dims, and the coolness of peace spreads. This practice is not about rejecting the natural desire to avoid harm or to care for others. It is about distinguishing between wise care and greedy clinging. Wise care acts clearly in the present, doing what can be done, then releasing. Greedy worry clings to outcomes beyond control, replaying them endlessly. The difference is subtle but profound. One leads to peace, the other to endless agitation. Over time, the recognition of worry as greed reshapes the mind. You begin to notice cravings more quickly. Each time you catch yourself worrying, you ask, "What am I clinging to?" The answer reveals the craving, and the craving can be dropped. Slowly, the habit shifts. Anxiety, once automatic, becomes less frequent, less convincing, less powerful. The mind rests more often in ease, because the fires of greed no longer fuel it. This understanding also deepens insight into the nature of suffering itself. The Buddha taught that craving is the cause of suffering. By seeing worry as craving, you see directly how suffering arises. And by releasing worry, you see directly how suffering ends. This is not abstract theory, but lived truth, felt in the quiet relief of letting go. In this way, worry becomes a teacher. Each time it appears, it points to what you are grasping. Each release becomes practice in the path of letting go. Slowly, you transform worry from poison into medicine, from hindrance into guidance. What once bound you becomes what frees you, because it continually points you back to the truth of craving and the possibility of release. To see worry as subtle greed is to strip it of its disguise and expose its root. Care becomes genuine when freed from clinging. Responsibility becomes clear when not tied to craving. Love becomes pure when not chained to control. And in this purity, worry has no place to grow. The heart rests, the mind clears, and life is lived not in restless craving but in effortless peace. When worry is uncovered as a subtle form of greed, craving certainty and control, the mind begins to recognize its hunger more honestly. Yet simply seeing the root is not enough. The heart also needs nourishment. Letting go of craving leaves a space, and unless that space is filled with something wholesome, the old habits return. This is where joy, or piti, enters the path. Far from being indulgence or distraction, meditative joy is medicine. It is the wholesome energy that displaces the restless habit of worry and heals the exhaustion left by years of grasping. The Buddha described joy as a natural factor of awakening. It arises when the mind rests in wholesome states, when attention settles, and when the burden of craving lightens. Unlike worldly excitement, which burns quickly and leaves emptiness, meditative joy is steady, calming, and deeply satisfying. It is not about chasing pleasure, but about cultivating an inner wellspring that sustains clarity. This distinction is crucial because worry thrives in a barren mind. Where there is no joy, anxiety finds easy soil. Where joy is cultivated, worry withers. The experience of meditative joy often begins subtly. As the breath steadies and the body softens, a lightness arises. The mind feels refreshed, as if washed clean. This joy is not tied to external events. It comes from release. Even a moment of letting go, a moment without clinging, sparks this joy. The heart recognizes the freedom, however brief, and responds with delight. Over time, this delight deepens, becoming a refuge more reliable than fleeting pleasures. Worry, by contrast, contracts. It tightens the chest, narrows attention, and drains vitality. Joy expands. It opens the body, brightens the mind, and generates energy. These two states cannot coexist fully. When joy fills the heart, anxiety cannot dominate. The practice, then, is not only to push away worry, but to actively cultivate joy, to feed the mind with medicine instead of poison. Cultivating joy begins with simple attention to the wholesome. Gratitude is one doorway. When you recall acts of kindness, moments of generosity, or the blessings already present, the heart warms. This warmth is the seed of joy. Unlike craving, which focuses on what is missing, gratitude focuses on what is given. This shift alone undermines worry, because it turns the mind from lack to fullness. Another doorway is virtue. When you live ethically, refrain from harming, and act with kindness, the heart feels unburdened. There is no remorse, no restlessness. This purity generates natural joy, because the mind knows it is on stable ground. Worry thrives on doubt and regret. Virtue removes both, leaving space for joy to grow. Meditation deepens this process. When you rest attention on the breath, the body relaxes, and joy arises spontaneously. At first it may be fleeting, a wave of ease or a moment of delight, but with practice it stabilizes, spreading through the body like warmth through water. The Buddha described this as joy pervading every limb, saturating the whole being. This saturation displaces worry not through force but through fullness. There is simply no room left for agitation. Joy also arises through loving kindness. When you extend goodwill to yourself and others, the heart softens. Even toward those who have harmed you, when you wish them freedom from suffering, a subtle joy emerges. This joy is not giddy, it is serene, rooted in compassion. It grows stronger the more it is practiced, and as it grows, anxiety shrinks because the mind no longer circles around fear or hostility. It is important to note that joy is not escape. Some fear that cultivating joy in meditation is indulgent, turning away from the reality of suffering. But in truth, joy strengthens the mind for facing suffering. Just as a nourished body can endure illness better than a malnourished one, a joyful mind can meet pain without collapse. Joy does not deny difficulty, it provides the resilience to face it without drowning. The Buddha placed joy before tranquility and concentration in the path of awakening. This order is intentional. Without joy, the mind resists stillness, restless and agitated. Joy soothes restlessness, making tranquility possible. Tranquility then deepens concentration, and concentration opens to wisdom. Joy, therefore, is not optional, it is a crucial stepping stone. Worry disrupts this sequence, scattering the mind before tranquility can arise. By cultivating joy, you align with the natural unfolding of the path. Daily life offers endless opportunities for this practice. Joy can be cultivated in small moments, savoring the breath of morning air, feeling gratitude for a meal, sharing kindness with a stranger. Each moment of joy strengthens the mind against worry. Over time, these moments accumulate, reshaping habit. Where the mind once turned automatically to fear, it now turns naturally to joy. Even in the midst of hardship, joy can be found. It may not be exuberant, but it can be quiet and steady. The joy of resilience, of patience, of integrity. These are not diminished by difficulty. In fact, they shine more brightly in it. Recognizing this teaches that joy is not fragile but deeply rooted. It does not depend on everything going well. It depends on the heart aligning with the Dharma. Cultivating joy also transforms relationships. An anxious heart often projects fear onto others, creating tension and mistrust. A joyful heart radiates ease, creating connection and safety. Others feel this difference. Joy is contagious in the best way. It uplifts those around you, creating a cycle of peace that diminishes collective worry. In this way, your personal practice becomes a gift to the world. There is also wisdom in joy. When the mind is joyful, it sees more clearly. Anxiety clouds vision, exaggerating threats and hiding possibilities. Joy brightens perception, revealing balance and perspective. This clarity is not naive, it does not ignore danger, but it prevents the distortion that worry creates. Joy and wisdom together form a pair that undermines anxiety completely. Over time, joy becomes a refuge. When worry tries to arise, you turn to the practices that spark joy. Gratitude, loving, kindness, meditation on the breath, reflection on virtue. Each time you return, you strengthen the pathway. Eventually, joy becomes the default state, not through force, but through habit. Worry may still appear, but it cannot stay long in a heart saturated with joy. The Buddha often described liberated beings as radiant with joy. Their joy was not shallow pleasure, but the deep delight of freedom from clinging. To cultivate joy now is to walk in their footsteps, preparing the heart for liberation. It is to displace worry with the taste of freedom, even before final awakening. In the end, meditative joy is not a luxury. It is medicine for a restless world, a cure for the endless hunger of worry. By cultivating joy, you do more than feel better, you align with the very structure of the path. You weaken anxiety at its root, strengthen resilience for challenges, and open space for wisdom to shine. Each moment of joy is a moment of freedom, and in that freedom, the habit of worry loses its hold. This is how the path becomes not only bearable but radiant, not only disciplined but joyful, not only free of anxiety but filled with the lightness of peace. When the heart is nourished by meditative joy and anxiety loses its grip through the medicine of delight, another doorway to freedom begins to reveal itself. Joy lightens the burden, but worry often tries to creep back through complexity, through endless possessions, countless choices, and the weight of maintaining what we cling to. The Buddha pointed to a path where this burden is lifted not by acquiring more but by releasing. This is the monastic mind, a simplicity that does not depend on robes or monasteries, but on the inner renunciation of excess. To renounce is not to lose, it is to breathe again. It is to discover that owning less, both outwardly and inwardly, creates a natural, effortless state where worry cannot find soil. Worry thrives in the soil of complication. The more you own, the more you fear loss. The more roles you carry, the more identities you must defend. The more attachments fill the mind, the more restless it becomes. Monastic simplicity cuts through this tangle. It pares life down to essentials, not as punishment but as relief. With fewer possessions to protect, fewer desires to chase, fewer illusions to maintain, the heart rests. This rest is not laziness, it is freedom. Material simplicity is the most obvious aspect. Possessions require care, protection, and constant attention. A single object may seem small, but multiplied by dozens, hundreds, or thousands, the mind becomes entangled. Worry arises. Will it break? Will it be stolen? Will it lose value? Each item becomes a seed of anxiety. Monastic simplicity reveals the hidden truth. Life does not become poorer with fewer possessions, it becomes lighter. With less to guard, you discover how much peace is hidden in space, uncluttered. Yet the deeper renunciation is mental. The mind itself clings to collections, opinions, identities, memories, future plans. Each one is carried like luggage on a long journey. The more you carry, the slower and more painful the walk. Anxiety is the constant checking of this luggage. Do I still have it? What if I lose it? How will I manage if it's taken? The monastic mind sets down the bags. Not by erasing memory or abandoning responsibility, but by refusing to treat every thought as something that must be guarded. This inner letting go brings relief that no external possession could match. The freedom of monastic simplicity is not limited to monks. Any person can taste it by practicing intentional release. Begin with one possession, one demand, one attachment. Notice the space that opens when you let it go. That space itself is the medicine. Worry requires clutter, but in emptiness it cannot breathe. Each act of release is not deprivation, it is an offering of peace to yourself. Renunciation also reveals the illusion of ownership. Much worry arises from trying to control what can never truly be owned: time, reputation, even relationships. To cling to them as possessions is to set yourself up for endless anxiety. The monastic mind loosens this illusion. It recognizes that everything passes through, that nothing belongs to the self. When ownership is released, worry falls away because there is nothing left to lose. This simplicity extends into daily rhythms. Monastic life follows clear patterns, periods of meditation, work, study, and rest. These rhythms reduce decision fatigue, which is itself a cause of worry. Modern life often overwhelms with choices: what to wear, what to eat, where to go, how to spend time. Each choice becomes a seed of anxiety. Monastic simplicity removes excess choice, creating freedom within structure. This does not require joining a monastery. It can be practiced in any home by creating steady routines. Stability calms restlessness, and worry finds less room to grow. The Buddha often spoke of renunciation as joy. Far from being grim austerity, it is the delight of being unburdened. The person who owns less is freer to move, freer to rest, freer to focus on what matters. The one who clings less mentally is freer to listen, freer to learn, freer to love. This is why renunciation is not loss but relief. It is discovering that you can live fully without being owned by what you own. Simplicity also deepens concentration. The mind scattered across countless attachments cannot unify. Worry scatters because it tries to hold everything at once. Simplicity gathers the mind, allowing it to rest fully in one object, one breath, one moment. This is the soil in which deep meditation grows. Without it, restlessness reigns. With it, the mind enters stillness naturally. Relationships, too, are transformed by the monastic mind. Without grasping, love becomes lighter. You no longer worry about controlling others, about securing their constant approval, about ensuring their choices match your desires. You care deeply, but without clinging. This care feels freer, more compassionate, less entangled in fear. The worry that once poisoned love fades, because love is no longer ownership, it is presence. The relief of simplicity can even be seen in the body. Tension often arises from the need to manage too much, too many tasks, too many objects, too many roles. When life is simplified, the body softens. The breath slows, the shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches. This physical ease mirrors the mental ease of renunciation. You carry less, so you relax more. It is important to see that renunciation is not only about external reduction. One can live with few possessions and still be full of inner clutter. True monastic mind is the willingness to let go of attachment wherever it hides. This includes subtle attachments to being right, to being admired, to being in control. Each release brings deeper peace. Each letting go reveals more clearly how much anxiety was created by holding tightly. Practicing this simplicity does not mean rejecting the world. It means relating to it differently. You still eat, work, and care for others, but without clinging. You still interact with possessions, but without being bound by them. You still plan, but without demanding certainty. This balanced approach makes simplicity sustainable. It is not withdrawal, but freedom within engagement. The Buddha called this freedom nibbana, coolness, the extinguishing of the fire of craving. The monastic mind points toward this by cooling the flames of possession and clinging. Each time you release an unnecessary burden, you taste a drop of this coolness. Over time, the drops become a stream, and the stream becomes a river leading to liberation. Even small steps reveal this truth. Cleaning a room, donating unused items, simplifying your schedule, each act brings clarity. But the deeper simplicity comes when you notice inner clutter and choose not to feed it. You hear a worried thought, and instead of grasping, you let it pass. This inner renunciation is the true heart of the monastic mind. In a world that constantly pushes consumption, accumulation, and endless choice, this simplicity is radical. It is resistance to the forces that keep worry alive. To live simply is to reclaim peace. It is to say no to restlessness and yes to stillness. It is to recognize that freedom is not found in owning more but in needing less. The monastic mind shows that effortless living is not about arranging perfect conditions, but about carrying less in every sense. When possessions, roles, and attachments are released, worry cannot find roots. Life unfolds more lightly, more naturally, more peacefully. Renunciation becomes joy, and simplicity becomes freedom. In this freedom, the restless habit of anxiety fades, and the heart rests in the spacious ease of being unburdened. When the heart discovers relief in the simplicity of renunciation, worry begins to lose the ground it once thrived on. The fewer burdens we carry, the less soil there is for anxiety to root itself. Yet, even when possessions and roles are released, worry can still creep back through the most subtle doorway of all the illusion of self-importance. The Buddha described this distortion as mana, conceit. Conceit is not only arrogance, it is the endless measuring of self against others, better, worse, or equal. Worry is born from the same delusion, whispering that everything depends on me, that my control, my success, my identity must be secured. This recognition is both unsettling and liberating. Unsettling because it exposes how deeply the sense of I fuels worry. liberating, because once the connection is seen, worry is no longer mistaken for care. It is revealed as another form of conceit, another attempt of the self to make itself central. To meet worry in this light is to dismantle its foundation. Conceit appears in three forms. The most obvious is superiority, believing oneself better than others. The opposite is inferiority, believing oneself worse. The third is equality, constantly comparing to ensure you are at least on the same level. Each is bound by the assumption of a permanent self. Worry arises from this same assumption. When you say, "What if I fail? What if they think less of me? What if I cannot handle it?" you are reinforcing the idea that there is a solid me whose worth must be defended. The anxious mind makes selfhood its battlefield. Think of how often worry is centered on identity. You worry about whether you are competent, respected, loved, secure. You worry about how others perceive you, whether you are keeping up, whether you belong. These anxieties may appear as care for the future, but at their core they are questions of self. What will become of me? Conceit fuels this cycle because it keeps you entangled in the story of self-comparison. The Buddha taught that liberation comes from seeing the emptiness of self, the way the five aggregates of body and mind are impermanent and not self. Worry resists this teaching because it thrives on the illusion of permanence. It insists, "I must survive, I must be approved, I must control." In truth, the self that worry protects is constantly shifting, never stable. To cling to it is like clinging to smoke. Conceit strengthens the illusion. Wisdom reveals its emptiness. Recognizing worry as conceit changes how you respond. Instead of feeding the anxious stories, you ask, "Who is this I that everything depends on?" The question itself exposes the illusion. You see that the body is changing, thoughts are flowing, emotions are rising and passing. There is no fixed self at the center. Without a fixed self, the idea that everything depends on me collapses. And when that illusion collapses, the anxiety built upon it dissolves. This does not mean you abandon responsibility. Action still happens, choices are still made, care is still offered, but the weight shifts. You no longer carry the conceit that you are the sole controller of outcomes. You participate as one condition among many. This humility removes the pressure of self-importance, and worry loses its grip. Consider how much anxiety is tied to superiority. The need to prove yourself better creates endless worry about performance, recognition, and success. Conceit drives you to achieve not for the sake of the task, but for the sake of self-image. When you see this, you recognize worry as the shadow of conceit. By releasing superiority, you also release the anxiety it generates. Inferiority fuels worry in a different way. The belief that you are worse than others creates fear of judgment, fear of exposure, fear of not being enough. Worry circles endlessly. They will see I am weak, I will never measure up, I am unworthy. This too is conceit, because it centers on me just as much as superiority does. Seeing worry as conceit reveals that even feelings of inferiority are another form of self-centeredness. Letting go is not about inflating the self, but about dissolving its centrality altogether. Even equality, the constant comparing to ensure balance, breeds worry. You fear falling behind, fear being outdone, fear losing status. Conceit whispers, "At least stay equal." Anxiety follows. Am I keeping up? This subtle comparison keeps the self at the center, feeding the restless mind. True freedom is not found in being superior, inferior, or equal. It is found in stepping out of comparison altogether. The practice to dissolve conceit is the same practice that dissolves worry. Mindfulness of impermanence and non-self. Each time you notice worry saying, "It all depends on me," you turn to the aggregates. You see the body changing, the breath moving, thoughts rising and falling. You see that what you call me is only conditions unfolding. With this vision, conceit weakens, and, as conceit weakens, worry loses its foundation. Meditation is a direct laboratory for this practice. Sitting quietly, you may feel worry arise about whether you are meditating well. This is conceit. I should be better than this. I am worse than others. I am equal to none. By noticing this, you release it. You return to the breath, to presence, to the simple awareness that needs no self to validate it. Over time, this practice trains the mind to drop both conceit and the worry it produces. The Buddha often described the conceit, "I am," as one of the last fetters to fall before final liberation. This shows how subtle and deep it is. Worry, too, can persist even in advanced practice because it hides within this conceit. By seeing the two as linked, you bring clarity to one of the deepest roots of suffering. The more you dissolve self-concern, the more worry fades. This insight also transforms relationships. Much of interpersonal anxiety arises from conceit, fear of being judged, desire to be admired, worry about comparison. When you see these as forms of conceit, compassion replaces anxiety. You realize others are trapped in the same illusions, measuring themselves endlessly. Instead of competing or fearing, you feel empathy. You step out of comparison, and peace follows. The recognition that worry is conceit also prevents spiritual pride. Even on the path, one may worry about progress. Am I advanced enough? Am I as wise as others? Will I reach liberation? This is conceit wearing spiritual robes. Seeing it clearly prevents the trap of comparing even spiritual attainment. Practice becomes purer, free from the anxiety of measurement. Over time, the habit of self-concern weakens. Worry may still appear, but you see it instantly as the whisper of conceit. You no longer mistake it for truth. You no longer let it command your energy. Instead, you let it pass, knowing it has no foundation in reality. Each act of release deepens freedom. The Buddha's words are clear. Conceit says, "I am better, I am worse, I am equal." Worry whispers, "It all depends on me." Both are delusions of self. To see this is to cut worry at its root. It is to free the heart not only from anxiety, but from the illusion that sustained it. And in that freedom, you discover what the monastic mind, the joyful heart, and the path of release have been pointing toward all along. The effortless peace of life lived without the burden of self. When worry is exposed as a voice of conceit, whispering that everything depends on me, the illusion of self is seen as the root of much suffering. Yet even after the idea of self is questioned, the anxious thoughts still rise and fall, sometimes with great force. The key to loosening their grip is not fighting them, but observing their nature directly. The Buddha pointed again and again to anicca impermanence as the truth that sets the heart free. Every fear, no matter how sharp, fades if it is watched with awareness. To see impermanence firsthand is to see that worry has no lasting power. Fear feels permanent in the moment. An anxious thought can seem like a heavy stone dropped into the chest, immovable and absolute. But when observed closely, it is not stone at all. It is a ripple, already shifting. The tightness in the chest changes, the racing thoughts alter, the sensations rise and pass. Fear is not fixed, it is movement. Worry is not a prison wall, it is a wave already dissolving. The practice of seeing impermanence directly in fear is not theory but lived truth, revealed with every breath of mindful observation. This insight is radical because anxiety thrives on the illusion of permanence. When worry arises, it convinces you it will last forever. It whispers, "This fear is who you are. You will never escape it. It defines you." Believing this, you panic, grasp for control, or sink into despair. But impermanence breaks this lie. No thought, no sensation, no mood has ever stayed. Every single one has changed. Seeing this again and again with mindfulness rewires the heart. You stop believing the voice of permanence, and worry weakens. Meditation is the ground where this truth becomes visible. When fear appears during sitting, instead of fleeing, you stay. You feel the pulse of anxiety, the rise and fall of breath, the heat of restlessness. At first it seems overwhelming, but if you simply observe, a shift occurs. The sensations change shape. The intensity rises and falls. A thought interrupts, then fades. With patience, you see clearly. Impermanence is not an idea, it is the nature of experience. Once you see this, fear loses its absolute power. This does not mean fear never arises. It means when it does, you no longer fear the fear. You know it will pass, as it always has. This knowledge creates space. Instead of clinging or resisting, you allow. This allowing itself is freedom. Anxiety cannot dominate when you refuse to grant it permanence. The Buddha compared impermanence to a constant river, always moving, never still. To worry is to treat the river as if it were a frozen block, solid and unchanging. But when you step into mindfulness, you feel the flow. The anxious thought is already moving downstream, already dissolving. By the time you name it, it has already shifted. To see this is to realize that fear has no true solidity. It cannot hold you unless you grasp it as fixed. This insight also reshapes how you meet the past. Regret is worry turned backward, clinging to moments gone. But impermanence reveals that even the sting of memory changes each time it arises. The past is not fixed, it is reconstructed in the present and fades again. Recognizing this softens regret. You no longer trap yourself in the illusion that past mistakes are permanent marks. They too are impermanent ripples, shifting with each breath. The same is true for the future. Anxiety projects images of disaster, treating them as permanent fate. But impermanence shows that the future is never fixed. It is open, conditioned by countless changing causes. To cling to a single fearful outcome is to deny this truth. By reflecting on impermanence, you loosen the hold of these projections. You see them for what they are, passing thoughts, not destiny. Daily life offers endless opportunities to observe impermanence in fear. Notice how quickly moods shift. What felt unbearable an hour ago softens by evening. What seemed terrifying yesterday loses its edge today. Even the deepest grief changes texture over time. No fear has ever stayed unchanged. Each one has followed the law of arising and passing. The practice is to notice this consciously, to bring mindfulness into the flow so that the truth becomes embodied, not abstract. Seeing impermanence in worry also generates compassion. When you realize how fleeting even the most powerful fears are, you soften toward yourself and others. You no longer judge harshly for being anxious because you see it is only a passing state. You no longer condemn others for their fears because you know theirs too will pass. Compassion grows from the recognition of shared impermanence. This teaching also dismantles the illusion of control. Much anxiety is the attempt to make impermanent things permanent, to hold on to youth, possessions, relationships, status. Worry is the cry of clinging against the current of change. But once you see that change is unstoppable, the futility of clinging becomes clear. Instead of resisting, you learn to flow. You act wisely, care deeply, but you stop fighting the river. This release lightens the heart instantly. Impermanence also points toward deeper wisdom. When you see that every thought and sensation passes, you begin to question whether there is anything solid at all. The self you thought worry was protecting is revealed as another impermanent process: body, feelings, perceptions, formations, consciousness, all changing. Anxiety weakens, not only because its objects are impermanent, but because the self it protects is also impermanent. This insight opens the door to liberation. Practical reflection can deepen this. You can remind yourself, this fear too shall pass. Not as a cliché, but as a reminder of Dharma. You can reflect on past worries that once seemed overwhelming but are now gone. You can look closely at the current anxiety and observe how it shifts from moment to moment. These reflections train the mind to trust impermanence, to rest in the knowledge that nothing, not even fear, can stay. As this trust grows, life changes. You no longer cling desperately to pleasant states because you know they too will pass. You no longer resist unpleasant states because you know they will fade. You live with balance, meeting each moment with calm. This balance is the fruit of seeing impermanence everywhere, especially in fear. Worry loses its foundation and peace arises naturally. The Buddha said that to see impermanence is to see the Dharma, and to see the Dharma is to see liberation. This is not poetry, but direct instruction. When you see impermanence in every fear, you are seeing the Dharma itself. You are living the path of release. Anxiety cannot dominate a mind that knows every thought is already passing, every fear already dissolving. In this way, worry becomes a teacher. Each time it arises, it offers the chance to observe impermanence directly. Each time you watch it fade, you confirm the truth. Slowly, confidence grows not in the illusion of control, but in the reality of change. This confidence is unshakable because it is grounded in direct experience. With this wisdom, life becomes lighter. Fear still visits, but it cannot stay. Anxiety still arises, but it cannot rule. The mind rests in the flow of impermanence, knowing that nothing binds forever. In that resting, freedom shines. The restless habit of worry dissolves, replaced by the calm certainty that all things, even fear itself, are passing waves in the endless river of change. When impermanence is seen clearly in every fear, the grip of anxiety loosens because nothing is taken as lasting or absolute. The heart softens into the flow of change and no longer fights against it. Yet another subtle current continues to trouble the mind, the restless search for more. Even when fear fades, the craving for just a little extra returns: more safety, more wealth, more recognition, more certainty. This craving feeds the endless cycle of calculation, keeping the mind trapped in the future. The Buddha offered a direct antidote to this restlessness in the teaching of Santuti, contentment, the Dharma of enough. Knowing deeply that this is enough dissolves anxious striving and frees the heart from worry. Worry grows wherever the soil of discontent is fertile. The thought that what I have is not sufficient generates constant measuring. Do I have enough money, enough love, enough ability, enough respect? Each measurement carries anxiety, because no matter the answer, craving whispers for more. This is the hunger that never rests, the endless pursuit that fuels fear of loss and failure. Contentment uproots this cycle by affirming that peace is not found in gaining more, but in recognizing the sufficiency of what already is. The Buddha praised contentment as the true wealth of practitioners. A person may possess riches but live in poverty of mind if they are never satisfied. Another may have little but live like a sovereign if they rest in the knowledge of enough. Worry does not arise from what is possessed, but from how the mind perceives it. If the mind is restless, no amount will silence its fear. If the mind is content, even the simplest life glows with freedom. To cultivate contentment, one begins by reflecting on the basics that sustain life. The body is clothed, hunger is met, shelter is provided, breath continues. These fundamental supports, when recognized, generate gratitude. Gratitude is the doorway to contentment. Worry fades in gratitude because it cannot coexist with the restless hunger for more. Each time you pause to say, "This is sufficient," you close the door to anxious calculation. Contentment does not mean passivity. It does not mean refusing to act or improve. It means acting from clarity rather than from restless craving. You may work toward goals, but you do not hinge your peace on their attainment. You may care for loved ones, but you do not tie your worth to their approval. You may earn money, but you do not enslave your mind to the endless chase for more. In this balance, worry fades because the heart no longer makes its peace conditional on future outcomes. Anxiety often disguises itself as responsibility. The mind insists, "If I stop striving, everything will collapse." But this is fear, not wisdom. The Dharma of enough reveals that peace and responsibility can coexist. When you act from contentment, you actually act more wisely because your judgment is not clouded by desperation. Worry narrows the view, exaggerates threats, and distorts possibilities. Contentment opens perspective, allowing clear decisions rooted in balance. In meditation, contentment is essential. Without it, the mind grasps for special experiences, restless for progress, anxious about results. With contentment, each breath is enough, each moment of awareness sufficient. This shift transforms meditation from a struggle into a refuge. The same principle applies to life. When the mind rests in enough, every moment becomes sanctuary. Contentment also heals relationships. Much of relational anxiety comes from craving others to be more attentive, more affectionate, more aligned with your desires. This craving fuels disappointment and fear. When you cultivate enough, you release this hunger. You appreciate what is given rather than tormenting yourself with what is absent. This acceptance opens space for genuine connection, free of anxious demand. The Buddha taught that craving is the root of suffering. Worry is one of its fruits. By cultivating enough, you weaken craving at the root, and the fruit of anxiety no longer ripens. This practice is not a one-time decision, but a daily cultivation. Each time you pause to recognize sufficiency, you strengthen the habit of enough. Each time you resist the urge to measure against others, you feed peace instead of fear. Even in hardship, contentment can be practiced. It does not deny pain or difficulty, but affirms sufficiency in the essentials. A body in pain can still breathe. A life in challenge can still find kindness. A heart in loss can still know compassion. These recognitions anchor contentment even when conditions are not ideal. This anchoring prevents worry from overwhelming the mind, because the foundation of enough remains intact. The Dharma of enough also cuts through comparison. Anxiety often blooms in the shadow of others, seeing their success, their beauty, their possessions, and feeling insufficient. But contentment dissolves this shadow by affirming, "My life as it is contains enough." The race of comparison loses meaning. Peace arises not by winning, but by stepping out of the race altogether. Gratitude practices strengthen this insight. Each day, reflecting on what sustains you shifts attention from lack to abundance. Worry feeds on lack. Gratitude feeds contentment. Over time, The habit of noticing sufficiency becomes natural. The mind rests more easily, no longer spinning calculations of what might be missing. Contentment also brings joy, not the fleeting joy of acquisition, but the deep joy of release. When you stop demanding more, you discover the quiet delight of simply being. This joy strengthens resilience, because it does not depend on conditions. Worry cannot uproot a joy that rests on the foundation of enough. The Buddha called contentment a great protection. A person content with little is safe, because they cannot be manipulated by promises of more. They are not enslaved by fear of loss, because they do not cling to excess. This security is inner wealth, unshaken by external change. Anxiety thrives on vulnerability to loss. Contentment is the shield that renders such threats powerless. Ultimately, the Dharma of enough is a direct path to liberation. It undermines the restless craving that fuels samsara. Each moment of sufficiency is a moment of freedom. Each act of release weakens the cycle. To know enough is to live outside the grip of anxiety, to rest in a peace that no calculation of the future can disturb. Living with contentment does not mean a life without ambition or care. It means ambition is rooted in clarity, not in lack. It means care is expressed without fear. It means goals are pursued with balance, not desperation. This is the middle way, active engagement with life, free from the chains of restless craving. As the practice deepens, the heart becomes unshakable. Worry no longer arises from the illusion of not having enough. Fear no longer dictates decisions. Life is lived with balance, gratitude, and peace. The endless calculations of the anxious mind fall silent, replaced by the quiet knowledge that in this moment, this breath, this life, there is enough. And in that knowledge, effortless freedom is found. When the heart learns the Dharma of enough and rests in contentment, much of the restless fear subsides. The endless calculations lose their grip because the mind no longer demands more. Yet even in this freedom, worry sometimes reappears through a doorway that looks noble: our love and concern for others. We fear for their health, their happiness, their choices, their safety. This fear often disguises itself as compassion, but the Buddha's teachings make a crucial distinction. True compassion, karuna, is steady, expansive, and wise, while worry is tight, restless, and rooted in attachment. To transform misplaced compassion into loving kindness, metta, and true compassion is to make care effortless instead of anxious. This distinction matters because many believe worry proves love. Parents worry about children, partners worry about each other, friends worry about those they care for. The restless mind says, "If I do not worry, I do not care." But this is confusion. Worry binds the mind in agitation and often makes us less helpful. Compassion frees the mind, making our care more skillful. To see worry as misplaced compassion is the first step toward transformation. Worry arises in care because of attachment to outcomes. You want the person you love to be safe, successful, and happy. When uncertainty appears, fear takes over. Anxiety insists on rehearsing every danger, every possible mistake, every potential loss. This agitation does not help the other person, it only clouds your clarity. Compassion without clinging, on the other hand, accepts that outcomes are uncertain but remains steady in love and presence. Loving kindness is the foundation of this transformation. Metta is the sincere wish. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. This wish does not grasp. It does not demand outcomes. It radiates goodwill without attaching to control. When you shift from anxious worry to this kind of boundless wish, your care becomes light yet powerful. The other person feels supported, not smothered, and you remain free of anxiety's weight. Compassion deepens this by meeting suffering directly. Karuna says, "I see your pain and I wish to help." But unlike worry, it does not collapse into agitation. It remains balanced, supported by equanimity. Compassion acts wisely, offering help where possible, and accepts limits where help is not possible. Worry insists on controlling what cannot be controlled. Compassion accepts the truth of conditions while still radiating care. The Buddha emphasized that true compassion must be paired with equanimity. Without balance, compassion degenerates into worry or despair. With balance, it becomes boundless and tireless. The practice of the four immeasurables, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, shows this clearly. Each quality supports the others, preventing compassion from turning into worry. In meditation, this transformation can be practiced directly. Begin with loving kindness for yourself, repeating phrases of goodwill. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I live at ease. As the heart softens, extend the wish outward, to loved ones, to strangers, even to those you find difficult. Notice the warmth this generates. Then shift into compassion, reflecting on the suffering of beings, and responding with the sincere wish to help. Feel how this care is steady, not restless. If anxiety arises, return to equanimity. All beings are owners of their actions. I cannot control every outcome. This balance dissolves worry while leaving compassion intact. Daily life offers countless chances to practice. When a loved one faces difficulty, notice the pull toward worry. Instead of rehearsing dangers, pause and silently offer loving kindness. May you be strong. May you find peace. If you can act, act wisely. If you cannot, rest in compassion without clinging. This practice shifts energy from restless fear to spacious care. The person receives genuine support and you remain at ease. This transformation also changes relationships. Worry often creates tension, hovering, controlling, criticizing, all in the name of care. But when care is freed from worry, it becomes gentle and supportive. Relationships flourish because the other person feels trusted rather than trapped. Loving kindness communicates faith, not fear. Compassion communicates presence, not panic. This shift not only heals your anxiety, but also strengthens bonds. Understanding worry as misplaced compassion also deepens humility. Often, worry assumes too much responsibility. It is my job to keep them safe. It all depends on me. This echoes the conceit of self. True compassion recognizes that each being walks their own path, shaped by their own karma. You can love and support, but you cannot shield them from impermanence. Recognizing this truth softens the grip of anxiety while leaving care untouched. The practice of sympathetic joy, mudita, further protects compassion from turning into worry. Instead of focusing only on the dangers others face, you celebrate their successes, strengths, and resilience. This shifts attention from fear to appreciation. When you see others as capable and resilient, worry weakens. Compassion becomes encouragement instead of anxiety. Equanimity, upekkha, completes the balance. It is the calm recognition that all beings are owners of their actions and heirs to their karma. You cannot live another's life for them. Equanimity does not mean indifference. It means care without clinging. When you hold compassion in this balance, worry cannot arise. You remain steady in love without being consumed by fear. This teaching also protects you from burnout. Worry drains energy quickly,